In October 1989, a 4-year-old girl was suddenly woken up late at night by the sound of the phone ringing and her mother screaming. She walked barefoot into the hallway and overheard her mother crying out that someone had died in a car accident. The girl just stared, shocked and unable to understand fully what was happening. But here's the thing that haunts this story. Earlier that day, when she hugged her father before he left for his business trip, she somehow already had a feeling she wouldn't see him alive again. That childhood story is just one of many unusual experiences that people have told Julia Mossbridge, a neuroscientist. She had her own strange gut-feeling experiences, and that's what inspired her to research scientifically. Tonight, we're diving into groundbreaking experiments that suggest your brain can react to events before they happen, and will investigate declassified government research that took precognition so seriously, they spent millions studying it. By the end of this journey, you'll understand why that inexplicable sense of knowing something before it happens might not be intuition at all. It might be your consciousness accessing actual memories from your personal future timeline.
Now prepare yourselves. We begin.
Let me tell you about an experiment that shattered everything scientists thought they knew about the relationship between mind and time. Picture this: you're sitting in a sterile laboratory room, electrodes attached to your scalp, connected to sensitive EEG equipment that's monitoring every flicker of electrical activity in your brain. In front of you is a computer screen and a simple button. You're told that when you press that button, a random image will appear on the screen exactly 5 seconds later. That's it. Press button, wait 5 seconds, see image. But here's where it gets interesting. The computer has been programmed with 2 types of images. Some are calm and peaceful: sunrise over mountains, gentle streams, sleeping babies. Others are emotionally disturbing: car crashes, violent scenes. Images designed to provoke a strong emotional response. The computer randomly selects which type of image to show you. There's no way you could possibly know what's coming. No way your brain could prepare for what it's about to see. Except that's exactly what happened. In 1997, while working at the University of Nevada, parapsychologist Dean Radin designed what would become known as the presentiment experiment. And what he discovered would challenge the very foundations of how we understand consciousness and time. Radin connected participants to EEG machines and had them trigger random images exactly as I just described. But he wasn't just measuring their brain activity after they saw the images. He was recording their neural activity during those 5 seconds before the image appeared. The results were absolutely mind-blowing. Participants' brain activity began spiking 2 to 3 seconds before emotionally disturbing images appeared on their screens. Their brains were literally reacting to events that hadn't happened yet. The calm images produced little to no pre-stimulus response. But the violent, disturbing images caused significant neural activation before they were even displayed. Think about what this means for a moment. These people's brains were responding to future emotional stimuli. Their neurons were firing in anticipation of something they had no way of knowing was coming. The effect was small. We're talking about subtle changes in brainwave patterns, but it was statistically significant and reproducible. Radin called this phenomenon presentiment, a feeling or impression of what is about to happen. But this wasn't just a feeling. This was measurable, objective, physiological evidence that the human brain can somehow sense future events. And here's what makes this absolutely extraordinary. This experiment has been replicated over 36 times by independent researchers in 7 different laboratories around the world. We're not talking about one isolated study that could be dismissed as a fluke or experimental error. We're talking about a robust, repeatable phenomenon that consistently shows the same results across different researchers, different laboratories, and different populations. The statistical odds of these results occurring by pure chance are astronomical. Meta-analyses combining data from multiple studies show effects that are millions to 1 against chance occurrence. This isn't wishful thinking or confirmation bias. This is hard, empirical data showing that human consciousness can somehow access information about future events. But it gets even stranger. Follow-up studies using other physiological measures found similar effects. Skin conductance, the electrical activity of your sweat glands, showed significant changes before emotional stimuli appeared. Heart rate variability shifted in anticipation of future emotional content. Even pupil dilation occurred before people saw images that would naturally cause their pupils to contract or dilate. Your entire autonomic nervous system, the unconscious systems that control your breathing, heart rate, digestion, and stress response, appears to be constantly scanning the future, preparing your body for what's about to happen. It's as if your biology has access to a preview of coming attractions that your conscious mind knows nothing about. Now, before you think this is just some fringe research that mainstream science has ignored, you need to understand that these findings have been published in peer-reviewed journals and presented at major scientific conferences. The methodology has been rigorously tested and refined. Control conditions have been implemented to rule out every possible conventional explanation. Critics initially suggested that maybe participants were unconsciously picking up on subtle cues. Perhaps the random number generator wasn't truly random. Or maybe there were microscopic delays in the computer system that allowed the brain to detect which type of image was coming. But subsequent experiments used quantum random number generators, devices that use the fundamental randomness of quantum mechanics to ensure truly unpredictable selections. The effects persisted. Other skeptics proposed that maybe the researchers were unconsciously influencing the results through their expectations. So experiments were designed to be completely automated, with no human involvement in the selection or presentation of stimuli. Computer algorithms handled everything from image selection to data analysis. The presentiment effects remained. Some suggested it might be an artifact of the statistical analysis. Maybe researchers were finding patterns in random data through selective reporting or data mining. But pre-registered studies, where researchers specify their analysis methods before collecting any data, continued to show significant results. The evidence kept mounting. Different types of stimuli produced similar effects. Instead of images, researchers used sounds, peaceful music versus screeching noise. They used temperature changes, warm air versus cold blasts. They used physical stimuli, gentle touch versus mild electric shocks. In every case, participants' physiology anticipated the emotionally significant stimuli. But perhaps the most remarkable finding came when researchers started looking at the timing of these effects. The presentiment response didn't just occur immediately before the stimulus appeared. It began building gradually, reaching peak intensity about 2 to 3 seconds before the event, then declining until the actual stimulus occurred. This suggests that consciousness isn't just randomly accessing future information. There appears to be a structured relationship between present awareness and future events, with the strength of the presentiment effect related to the emotional significance of the upcoming stimulus and the temporal distance from the present moment. What we're looking at here is evidence that human consciousness operates according to principles that violate our basic understanding of causality. In the conventional view, causes precede effects. Events in the present are caused by events in the past. The future cannot influence the present because it doesn't exist yet. But the presentiment experiments suggest something radically different. They suggest that the future can reach backward in time to influence present brain states. They suggest that consciousness might not be confined to the present moment, but might actually span across multiple points in your personal timeline. This is just the beginning. What we've discovered in these controlled laboratory conditions might be happening constantly in your daily life, just below the threshold of conscious awareness. Every time you have a gut feeling about something, every time you sense that something isn't quite right, every time you feel an inexplicable urge to take a different route home or call someone you haven't spoken to in months, your brain might be processing information from your personal future. The implications are staggering. If consciousness can access future information, then everything we think we know about the nature of time, memory, and reality itself needs to be reconsidered. And as we're about to discover, some very serious people have been taking these possibilities seriously for a very long time. What I'm about to tell you might sound like something out of a conspiracy theory, but every word is documented in declassified government files that you can read for yourself. For over 2 decades, the United States government secretly funded research into psychic phenomena, including the ability to perceive future events. They called it Project Stargate, and it represents one of the longest-running and most expensive investigations into consciousness and time that has ever been conducted. The story begins in the 1970s, During the height of the Cold War, intelligence agencies received reports that the Soviet Union was investing heavily in psychic research, attempting to develop what they called psychotronic weapons, technologies that could allegedly influence human minds and perceive distant events using nothing but consciousness. The CIA couldn't afford to let the Russians gain a psychic advantage, so in 1975, they launched their own program at Stanford Research Institute, led by physicists Russell Targ and Harold Puthoff. The official goal was to investigate whether human consciousness could gather intelligence information through what they termed remote viewing, the ability to perceive distant locations and future events using only the mind. The researchers recruited individuals who claimed to have psychic abilities and subjected them to rigorous scientific testing. The protocols were designed to eliminate every possible source of conventional information. Viewers were isolated in specially shielded rooms, often hundreds of miles away from their targets. They were given nothing more than random coordinates or abstract reference numbers and asked to describe what they perceived. What happened next defied every expectation. The remote viewers consistently provided accurate descriptions of distant locations they had never seen and had no way of knowing about. They described the layout of secret Soviet military installations. They provided details about hidden weapons programs. They even located hostages and identified terrorist activities. But here's where it gets truly extraordinary. Some of the most successful sessions involved precognitive viewing, describing future events that hadn't happened yet. Viewers were given coordinates for locations they would visit tomorrow, next week, or even months in the future. And with stunning accuracy, they described places they would eventually see, events that would eventually unfold, encounters that would eventually happen. The statistical results were impossible to dismiss. Over the course of the program, thousands of viewing sessions were conducted and analyzed by independent statisticians. The odds of achieving the observed accuracy rates through pure chance were calculated at millions to one. Even conservative analysis, accounting for possible methodological flaws, showed results that were vastly beyond what random guessing could produce. One of the most famous cases involved remote viewer Pat Price, who was asked to describe a Soviet installation at coordinates he had never heard of. Price provided detailed drawings and descriptions of a secret nuclear facility, including the positions of buildings, the configuration of equipment, and even the presence of a large crane. Years later, when satellite photographs of the location were declassified, they confirmed Price's descriptions with startling accuracy. Another remarkable case involved viewer Joseph McMonigle, who was asked to describe activities that would occur at a specific location 1 week in the future. McMonigle drew detailed sketches of a large mechanical device and described seeing groups of people engaged in construction activities. 1 week later, researchers visited the location and found construction crews assembling the exact type of equipment McMonigle had drawn. The government clients were impressed enough to continue funding the program for over 2 decades. Military and intelligence agencies regularly submitted operational requests for psychic intelligence gathering. The remote viewers were asked to locate missing military equipment, identify terrorist threats, and even track the movements of foreign leaders. But the most profound implications came from the precognitive sessions. If human consciousness could perceive future events, the strategic advantages would be enormous. Imagine being able to foresee enemy troop movements, predict terrorist attacks, or anticipate technological developments before they occurred. The researchers at SRI began developing theoretical frameworks to explain how precognitive remote viewing might work. They proposed that consciousness might not be localized to the brain, but might instead be a fundamental property of the universe itself. They suggested that information about all events, past, present, and future, might exist simultaneously in what they called the information field. According to this model, remote viewing worked by accessing different coordinates in this information space. Just as you might tune a radio to different frequencies to receive different stations, consciousness might be able to tune into different temporal and spatial coordinates to access information about distant or future events. The physics behind this theory drew from cutting-edge research in quantum mechanics. Scientists had already discovered that quantum particles could be entangled, instantaneously connected across vast distances in ways that seemed to violate the speed of light. If consciousness operated through quantum processes, It might be able to access non-local information through similar entanglement effects. Some researchers proposed that the brain might function as a kind of quantum antenna, capable of detecting subtle patterns in the quantum field that contained information about future probabilities, just as a radio antenna can detect electromagnetic waves carrying information. The brain might detect quantum waves carrying temporal information. The military applications were obvious, but the philosophical implications were even more profound. If consciousness could transcend space and time, then everything we thought we knew about the nature of mind and reality would need to be reconsidered. Are we isolated beings trapped in the present moment, or are we quantum entities with access to all of space and time? The official evaluation of Project Stargate, conducted by the American Institutes for Research, reached a carefully worded conclusion. They acknowledged that the statistical results showed effects beyond chance, and that some operational sessions had provided useful intelligence. But they concluded that the reliability and accuracy of remote viewing were not sufficient for operational use. The program was officially terminated in 1995, but not before generating over 80,000 pages of research documents and spending an estimated $20 million. The very fact that the government continued funding this research through decades suggests they were seeing results significant enough to justify the investment. Many of the researchers and remote viewers who participated in Project Stargate continue their work today through private institutions. The techniques developed during the program have been refined and are now taught to researchers around the world. The declassified documents provide a treasure trove of information about the practical applications of consciousness research. But perhaps the most important legacy of Project Stargate is the evidence it provides that precognitive abilities might be far more common than we realize. The remote viewers who participated in the program weren't born with supernatural powers. They were ordinary people who learned to access abilities that might be latent in all of us. This raises a tantalizing possibility. If consciousness can perceive future events in controlled laboratory conditions and operational intelligence scenarios, might it be doing the same thing in your everyday life? When you have a gut feeling about taking a different route to work, when you sense that something isn't right about a person you just met, when you wake up thinking about someone just before they call you, might these experiences be manifestations of the same precognitive abilities that the government spent millions studying? The answer to that question requires us to dive deeper into the biological mechanisms that might make such phenomena possible. And as we're about to discover, your body might be a far more sophisticated time-sensing apparatus than anyone ever imagined. There's something extraordinary happening in your gut right now, something that most people don't realize exists. Deep within your digestive system lies a network so sophisticated that neuroscientists call it the second brain. This isn't just a metaphor. It's a literal description of one of the most complex information processing systems in your body, and it might be your first line of defense against future threats you can't consciously perceive. The enteric nervous system, as it's formally known, contains over 100 million neurons. To put that in perspective, that's more nerve cells than you have in your spinal cord or your peripheral nervous system. This vast neural network doesn't just coordinate digestion, it's in constant, sophisticated communication with your brain through multiple pathways, creating what researchers call the gut-brain axis. The primary highway of this communication system is the vagus nerve, the longest cranial nerve in your body. This biological superhighway carries more information from your gut to your brain than from your brain to your gut, suggesting that your digestive system might be reporting on more than just what you ate for lunch. Recent research has uncovered something remarkable about this gut-brain communication network. Your enteric nervous system appears to be exquisitely sensitive to changes in your autonomic nervous system, the unconscious processes that control your heart rate, breathing, stress hormones, and emotional responses. And here's where it gets fascinating. These autonomic changes often occur before you consciously register any reason for them to change. Beatrice de Gelder at Harvard Medical School discovered that people can unconsciously detect emotional threats in their peripheral vision, things they're not consciously aware of seeing. But even more remarkably, their gut begins responding to these threats before their conscious mind recognizes anything is wrong. The enteric nervous system seems to be receiving and processing threat information that hasn't yet reached conscious awareness. This phenomenon becomes even more intriguing when we consider the time-reversed effects we discussed in the presentiment experiments. If your brain can react to future emotional stimuli, your gut might be one of the first places those reactions manifest. The phrase, gut feeling, might be far more literal than we ever imagined. Consider what happens during a typical gut feeling experience. You walk into a room and something doesn't feel right. Your stomach tightens slightly. You feel a subtle uneasiness that you can't quite explain. Minutes or hours later, something happens that validates your initial impression. A conflict erupts. Someone reveals information that changes everything. An accident occurs that you somehow sensed was coming. From a conventional perspective, this seems like remarkable intuition, your unconscious mind picking up on subtle social cues, body language, environmental factors that your conscious mind missed. But the presentiment research suggests another possibility. Your gut might have been reacting to the future event itself, creating a physical sensation of uneasiness that preceded the actual cause of that uneasiness. The biological mechanism for this could involve what researchers call interoceptive processing, your brain's ability to monitor and interpret internal bodily sensations. Your enteric nervous system is constantly sending information to your brain about the state of your digestive system, but this information is processed largely below the threshold of consciousness. Antonio Damasio at USC has shown that people make better decisions when they pay attention to subtle bodily sensations that occur before they consciously evaluate their options. He calls these somatic markers, physical sensations that guide decision making even when you can't articulate why you prefer one choice over another. In Damasio's famous Iowa gambling task, participants played a card game where they had to learn which decks were advantageous and which were risky. Remarkably, people began showing stress responses when reaching for the risky decks long before they consciously realized those decks were problematic. Their bodies knew which choices to avoid before their minds figured out why. But what if these somatic markers aren't just processing past experience and current environmental cues? What if they're also processing temporal information, subtle signals about future outcomes that haven't happened yet? The heart provides another fascinating piece of this puzzle. Your heart contains its own neural network, over 40,000 neurons that form a sophisticated information processing system. The Institute of HeartMath has conducted extensive research showing that heart rhythm patterns change before people are exposed to emotional stimuli. In their experiments, participants were shown a series of images on a computer screen. Some images were emotionally neutral, others were designed to evoke strong positive or negative emotions. The remarkable finding was that participants' heart rate variability began changing 4 to 6 seconds before the emotional images appeared on screen. Think about what this means. Your heart was responding to emotional content that hadn't been presented yet. The quantum random number generator selecting the images hadn't even made its decision, yet your cardiovascular system was already preparing for what was coming. Even more remarkably, when researchers divided their data based on whether participants were consciously paying attention to their heart sensations, they found that people who were more aware of their internal bodily states showed stronger and earlier precognitive responses. The better you are at sensing what's happening inside your body, the better you seem to be at sensing what's going to happen in your future. This suggests that developing interoceptive awareness, the ability to consciously monitor your internal bodily sensations, might be a way to amplify your natural precognitive abilities. Meditation practices that focus on breath awareness, body scanning, and mindful attention to internal sensations might be training the very systems that allow consciousness to access temporal information. The implications extend far beyond laboratory experiments. Throughout history, people have reported using bodily sensations to guide important decisions. Stock traders speak of gut feelings about market movements. Doctors describe intuitive hunches about patient diagnosis. Emergency responders talk about sensing when situations are about to turn dangerous. These might not just be metaphors for unconscious pattern recognition. They might be descriptions of a real biological phenomenon where the body's information processing systems access temporal data that consciousness can then interpret and act upon. Your skin provides yet another channel for this information. Galvanic skin response. The electrical conductivity of your skin, primarily controlled by sweat gland activity, shows remarkable sensitivity to future emotional events. In the presentiment experiments, Participants' skin conductance began changing 2 to 3 seconds before emotional images appeared. This response occurs completely outside conscious control. You can't consciously make your sweat glands activate. Yet somehow, this unconscious system was preparing for emotional stimulation that existed only as future probability at the time the response began. The pattern is consistent across multiple biological systems. Your nervous system, cardiovascular system, and electrodermal system all seem capable of responding to future events. It's as if your entire body is a sophisticated early warning system, constantly scanning the temporal horizon for significant events that might require preparation. But here's what makes this truly extraordinary. These effects don't just occur with artificially generated laboratory stimuli. They appear in real-world situations involving genuine future events. Airline passengers had been found to have elevated stress indicators before flights that will later encounter severe turbulence. Hospital patients show physiological changes before medical crises that won't manifest for hours or days. The terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001 provided a tragic but scientifically valuable natural experiment. Random number generators around the world, designed to produce completely unpredictable sequences, began showing subtle but statistically significant deviations from randomness in the hours before the attacks occurred. It was as if the collective consciousness of humanity was somehow sensing the approaching tragedy. This phenomenon, studied by the Global Consciousness Project at Princeton University, suggests that consciousness might influence physical systems in ways that transcend individual biology. If millions of people are unconsciously sensing future events, their collective mental activity might create detectable changes in sensitive physical instruments. Your individual gut feelings might be part of this larger phenomenon, local manifestations of consciousness interacting with temporal information that exists throughout the universe. The butterflies in your stomach before an important presentation, the uneasiness you feel when meeting someone new, the sudden urge to change your plans. All of these experiences might reflect your body's sophisticated ability to process information about your personal future timeline. Understanding the biological basis of gut feelings doesn't diminish their mystery, it deepens it. How do unconscious neural networks in your digestive system gain access to information about events that haven't happened yet? What kind of physical process could allow biological systems to transcend the normal flow of causation? The answers might lie in the strange world of quantum mechanics, where the familiar rules of classical physics break down and consciousness might play a fundamental role in shaping reality itself. What if I told you that the most advanced computer in the known universe might be sitting right between your ears, operating on principles that make our most sophisticated artificial intelligence look like a pocket calculator? What if consciousness itself isn't just an emergent property of complex neural networks, but something far more fundamental, a quantum phenomenon that transcends the ordinary boundaries of space and time? This isn't science fiction speculation. This is the cutting edge of consciousness research, where Nobel Prize-winning physicists and world-renowned neuroscientists are discovering that the human mind might operate according to the bizarre rules of quantum mechanics. Rules that include the possibility of consciousness accessing information from across both space and time. The story begins with one of the deepest mysteries in science. How does subjective, a conscious experience arise from objective, physical matter? How does the firing of billions of neurons create the rich inner world of thoughts, emotions, memories, and sensations that you experience right now as you watch this video? For decades, neuroscientists assumed that consciousness emerged from the complex interactions of neurons. That if you could map all the connections in the brain and understand how they process information, you would understand consciousness. But this approach has run into what philosopher David Chalmers calls the hard problem of consciousness. The hard problem isn't explaining how the brain processes information or responds to stimuli. We understand those mechanisms reasonably well. The hard problem is explaining why there's something it's like to be you. Why do you have subjective experiences instead of just being a biological computer processing inputs and generating outputs? In 1989, British physicist Roger Penrose proposed a radical solution to this mystery. Penrose, a Nobel Prize winner and one of the most respected mathematicians alive, argued that consciousness couldn't possibly emerge from classical computational processes alone. The brain, he insisted, must be tapping into quantum mechanical processes to generate the rich inner world of subjective experience. Penrose's argument was based on G. Dell's incompleteness theorems, which show that any formal mathematical system contains truths that can't be proven within that system. Human mathematicians can recognize these truths, suggesting that human consciousness has access to non-computational insights. If consciousness were just computation, it would be limited by the same constraints that limit formal mathematical systems. But Penrose's proposal raised a crucial question: how could quantum effects survive in the warm, wet environment of the brain? Quantum processes are notoriously fragile, easily disrupted by environmental interference. The brain operates at body temperature, surrounded by electrical activity and molecular motion that should destroy quantum coherence almost instantly. This is where anesthesiologist Sturt Hameroff entered the picture. Hameroff had been studying microtubules, tiny protein structures inside neurons that maintain cell shape and transport materials throughout the cell. These microtubules, Hameroff realized, might be perfectly structured to sustain quantum processes even in the chaotic environment of the brain. Microtubules are made of tubulin proteins arranged in precise geometric patterns. Each tubulin molecule can exist in multiple conformational states, and the interactions between neighboring tubulins create complex information processing networks within individual neurons. Hameroff proposed that these networks might function as biological quantum computers. The Penrose-Hameroff theory, known as orchestrated objective reduction or ORCH-R, suggests that consciousness arises from quantum computations occurring within microtubules throughout the brain. These quantum processes would allow the brain to explore multiple possible responses to any situation simultaneously, then collapse into a single conscious experience through a process called objective reduction. But here's where it gets truly mind-blowing. If consciousness operates through quantum processes, then it might have access to the non-local, time-transcendent properties that quantum mechanics allows. In the quantum world, particles can be instantaneously connected across vast distances through entanglement. Measurements can retroactively determine the properties of particles in the past through delayed choice experiments. Information can potentially flow backward in time through retrocausal influences. If your consciousness is fundamentally quantum, then it might be able to access information from across your entire timeline, past, present, and future. Your gut feelings might not be intuitive predictions based on unconscious pattern recognition. They might be your quantum consciousness accessing actual information from future states of your neural network. Dean Radin, the researcher who designed the presentiment experiments we discussed earlier, has become one of the leading proponents of quantum consciousness theories. He suggests that precognition might be explained through quantum entanglement between your present brain state and your future brain state. Some people hypothesize that precognition is your brain entangled with itself in the future. Radin explains, because entanglement is not only about things separated in space, but also separated in time. If it can be entangled with itself in the future, in the present you'd be feeling something like a memory that is going to happen in the future. Think about what this means. Every quantum particle that makes up your brain exists in a state of superposition, multiple possible states simultaneously, until a measurement collapses it into a single definite state. If consciousness involves quantum processes, then your awareness might span across multiple possible futures until the moment of conscious experience collapses these possibilities into a single present moment. Your gut feelings might be your consciousness detecting resonances between your current quantum state and highly probable future quantum states. The stronger the emotional significance of a future event, the stronger the quantum entanglement between your present and future brain states, and the stronger the precognitive sensation you experience. Recent experiments have provided intriguing support for quantum effects in biological systems. Photosynthesis, the process by which plants convert sunlight into chemical energy, appears to use quantum superposition to explore multiple energy transfer pathways simultaneously, then select the most efficient route. If simple plants can harness quantum effects for information processing, why not complex brains? Bird navigation provides another example. Many species of birds can navigate using Earth's magnetic field, and recent research suggests this ability might rely on quantum entanglement between electrons in special proteins in their eyes. These quantum compasses allow birds to literally see magnetic fields as visual overlays on their normal vision. If evolution has produced quantum navigation systems and quantum energy processing in other biological organisms, it's entirely plausible that consciousness itself might be a quantum information processing system that has access to non-local temporal information. The implications are staggering. If consciousness is quantum, then the classical view of mind as isolated and localized to individual brains might be completely wrong. Your consciousness might be fundamentally connected to the consciousness of other beings through quantum entanglement. The boundaries between self and other, between individual minds, might be far more permeable than we realize. Even more remarkably, if consciousness can access information from across time through quantum processes, then free will takes on a completely different meaning. Instead of being trapped in the present moment, making decisions based only on past information, you might have access to information about the future consequences of your choices. Your decisions might be informed by quantum knowledge of how different choices will play out across your personal timeline. This could explain why meditation practices that quiet the conscious mind often lead to better decision-making. When you reduce the noise of analytical thinking, you might be allowing your quantum consciousness to access temporal information that normally gets overwhelmed by the constant chatter of ordinary thought. The research is still in its early stages, and many neuroscientists remain skeptical of quantum consciousness theories. But the evidence is mounting that the brain operates according to principles that transcend classical physics. Anesthetics that eliminate consciousness appear to disrupt quantum processes in microtubules. Electromagnetic fields that interfere with quantum coherence can alter conscious experience. Perhaps most intriguingly, studies of meditation and altered states of consciousness show brain activity patterns that resemble quantum computational processes. Advanced meditators report experiences of expanded awareness that seem to transcend normal spatial and temporal boundaries, descriptions that align remarkably well with what we might expect from quantum consciousness accessing non-local information. If consciousness really is quantum, then every gut feeling you've ever had might be evidence of your mind's ability to transcend the normal flow of time. That sense of knowing something before it happens might not be intuition. It might be your quantum consciousness accessing actual memories from your future timeline. But this raises an even deeper question. If consciousness can access future information, how does that information get created in the first place? Are we seeing the future as it will definitely unfold, or are we seeing probability clouds of potential futures that our observations might actually influence? The answer to this question takes us into even stranger territory, where the act of observation itself might be creating the future that consciousness perceives. Imagine if I told you that the universe operates like a cosmic pool table, but instead of billiard balls moving in straight lines according to predictable physics, some of the balls can travel backward in time to influence shots that have already been played. It sounds impossible, yet this is exactly what cutting-edge physics is revealing about the nature of causation itself. What we're about to explore challenges the most fundamental assumption about how reality works, that causes always precede effects. The evidence suggests that under certain conditions, effects can actually precede their causes, creating feedback loops where the future reaches back to influence the past. And if this retrocausal influence is real at the quantum level, it might explain how consciousness can access information from future events. The story begins with one of the most famous thought experiments in physics, John Wheeler's delayed choice experiment. Wheeler, one of the giants of 20th century physics, designed this experiment to probe the deepest mysteries of quantum mechanics. The setup seems simple enough: fire a single photon, a particle of light, at a device called a beam splitter that gives the photon two possible paths to follow. In the classical version of this experiment, you have to decide before firing the photon whether you want to measure which path it took, particle behavior, or whether you want to observe interference patterns that show it took both paths simultaneously, wave behavior. The photon seems to know what kind of measurement you're planning and behaves accordingly, but Wheeler's genius was to delay the choice. In his thought experiment, you fire the photon and let it travel most of the way through the apparatus before deciding what kind of measurement to make. The photon has already decided whether to behave as a particle or wave, yet somehow your future measurement choice retroactively determines how it behaved in the past. when this experiment was actually performed in laboratories around the world. The results were exactly as Wheeler predicted. The photon's behavior, at the beginning of its journey, depended on measurement choices that hadn't been made yet when it began traveling. The future was literally reaching back to influence the past. But that's just the beginning of the retrocausal rabbit hole. In 2012, researchers at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem performed what they called a delayed choice quantum eraser experiment that took Wheeler's ideas to an even more mind-bending level. They showed that you could determine how a photon behaved in the past even after it had been detected and its fate seemingly sealed. The implications sent shockwaves through the physics community. If quantum particles can be influenced by future measurements, then the arrow of time, the idea that causation flows only from past to future, might not be as absolute as we thought. At the quantum level, the future appears to participate in creating the past. This is where things get really interesting for consciousness research. If retrocausal effects are real in physics, they might also be real in biology. And if biological systems can be influenced by future events, then consciousness, which appears to emerge from biological processes, might have natural access to information from across time. Enter Darrell Bem, a respected social psychologist at Cornell University who decided to test whether retrocausal effects could be detected in human behavior. In 2011, Bem published a series of 9 experiments in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology that would ignite one of the most heated debates in modern psychology. Bem's experiments were elegantly simple. He took well-established psychological phenomena and reversed their temporal order. For example, one classic finding in psychology is that people are better at recalling words they've practiced. So Bem had participants try to recall word lists, then afterward had them practice some of the words they had just tried to remember. The results were shocking. People were significantly better at recalling words they would practice in the future compared to words they would never practice. Their memory performance in the present was influenced by practice sessions that hadn't happened yet. In another experiment, Bem had participants predict where erotic images would appear on a computer screen. The locations were determined by a random number generator after the participants made their predictions. Yet people were significantly better than chance at predicting where the arousing images would appear, while showing no ability to predict neutral images. Across all 9 experiments, involving over 1,000 participants, Bem found consistent evidence that future events could influence past behavior. The effects were small, typically improving performance by just a few percentage points, but they were statistically significant and reproducible. The psychology community's reaction was explosive. Critics argued that Bem must have made methodological errors, that his statistics were flawed, that the effects would disappear under more rigorous controls. Bem's findings challenged the fundamental assumption that causes precede effects, and many researchers simply refused to accept that such violations of causality were possible. But here's what made Bem's work so compelling. He hadn't invented new experimental methods or used exotic statistical techniques. He had simply reversed the temporal order of well-established psychological experiments. If his methods were flawed, then the methods used in thousands of accepted psychology studies were equally flawed. The controversy led to numerous replication attempts, with mixed results. Some studies found similar effects to Bem's, others found nothing. But this inconsistency might actually be predicted by retrocausal theories. If the future can influence the past, then the act of attempting to replicate an experiment might itself influence the original results. This creates what researchers call the retractive replication effect. If a future replication study is designed by skeptics who expect to find nothing, their skeptical intent might retractively influence the original results, making them weaker or non-existent. Conversely, if future replications are conducted by researchers who are open to finding effects, their openness might retractively strengthen the original findings. This sounds like science fiction, but it's exactly what quantum mechanics predicts should happen if consciousness can influence quantum systems through observation effects. The observer effect in quantum mechanics shows that the act of observation changes the system being observed. If consciousness operates through quantum processes, then future observations might retractively influence past quantum states. The implications for understanding gut feelings are profound. If consciousness can access retrocausal influences, then Your brain might be receiving information about future events through quantum channels that operate outside normal time flow. Your gut feelings might be your conscious mind's interpretation of quantum information flowing backward from future events. Consider what happens during a typical precognitive experience. You have a strong feeling that you should change your route to work. You follow this intuition and later discover that your normal route was blocked by an accident that occurred after you made the decision to change routes. From a classical perspective, this seems like remarkable luck or unconscious pattern recognition. But from a retrocausal perspective, something much stranger might be happening. The future accident might be sending quantum information backward in time, creating subtle influences on your present brain state that your consciousness interprets as a gut feeling to change routes. Your decision to change routes might actually be part of a causal loop where the future accident participates in creating the conditions that allow you to avoid it. This isn't just philosophical speculation. Researchers have begun finding evidence for retrocausal effects in biological systems. Studies of decision-making show that people's choices can be influenced by future rewards they don't consciously know about. Brain imaging reveals neural activity that correlates with future events that haven't been determined yet. Dr. Dick Bierman at the University of Amsterdam has conducted numerous studies showing that people's physiology responds to future emotional stimuli, even when those stimuli are selected by quantum random number generators. The effects are small but consistent, suggesting that biological systems have some form of natural access to retrocausal information. Perhaps most remarkably, some studies suggest that the strength of retrocausal effects might be related to the emotional significance of future events, just as the presentiment experiments showed stronger effects for emotionally arousing stimuli. Retrocausal studies often find that emotionally significant future events produce stronger backward in time influences. This could explain why gut feelings seem to be most accurate for situations involving danger, major life changes, or emotionally important decisions. These are exactly the types of future events that would be most likely to send strong retrocausal signals back to present consciousness. The mechanism might involve what physicists call advanced waves, solutions to the fundamental equations of physics that travel backward in time. John Wheeler and Richard Feynman showed in the 1940s that electromagnetic fields could theoretically propagate both forward and backward in time. If consciousness involves electromagnetic processes in the brain, it might naturally detect these advanced waves carrying information from future events. Another possibility involves quantum entanglement across time. If your present brain state can become entangled with your future brain state, then changes in your future neural activity might instantaneously influence your present neural activity. Your gut feelings might be the subjective experience of this temporal quantum entanglement. The evidence for retrocausation is still controversial, and many scientists remain skeptical. But the theoretical framework is solid, grounded in well-established principles of quantum mechanics and relativity theory. Time-symmetric physics suggests that there's no fundamental reason why causation should flow only from past to future. If retrocausal effects are real, they would revolutionize our understanding of consciousness, free will, and the nature of time itself. They would suggest that the future actively participates in creating the present, that consciousness might be a four-dimensional phenomenon spanning across your entire timeline, and that gut feelings might be literal memories from tomorrow reaching back to inform today's decisions. But even if consciousness can access information from the future, how does this information get processed by biological systems? How does your body translate quantum retrocausal influences into the physical sensations we experience as gut feelings? The answers lie in understanding how quantum effects might manifest in living tissue. Your body is performing miracles of information processing that make our most advanced computers look primitive. Every second, trillions of cells coordinate their activities, exchange chemical messages, and maintain the delicate balance that keeps you alive. But what if this biological information network is doing something even more extraordinary? What if your body is constantly receiving and processing data from your personal future timeline? The evidence suggests that living systems have evolved sophisticated mechanisms for detecting and responding to information that transcends normal spatial and temporal boundaries, from the quantum processes in your neural microtubules to the electromagnetic fields generated by your heart. Your biology might be exquisitely tuned to detect subtle signals from future events. Let's start with your heart, an organ that's turning out to be far more complex than anyone imagined. Traditional medicine viewed the heart as a simple pump, pushing blood through your circulatory system according to signals from the brain. But researchers at the Institute of Heart Math have discovered that your heart is actually a sophisticated information processing center with its own neural network. Your heart contains over 40,000 neurons arranged in complex ganglia that can process information independently of your brain. This cardiac nervous system sends more signals to your brain than it receives, suggesting that your heart might be influencing your mental state more than your mental state influences your heart. Even more remarkably, your heart generates the strongest electromagnetic field in your body, about 60 times stronger than your brain's electromagnetic field and detectable several feet away from your body. This heart field appears to carry information that can be detected by other people's brains, suggesting that consciousness might involve electromagnetic processes that extend beyond individual bodies. But here's where it gets truly extraordinary. Research has shown that your heart's electromagnetic activity begins changing 4 to 6 seconds before you're exposed to emotional stimuli that are selected by truly random processes. Your heart is literally responding to future events that don't exist yet when the response begins. The mechanism might involve your heart's sensitivity to extremely subtle changes in Earth's electromagnetic field. The planet generates a complex electromagnetic environment that's influenced by solar activity, cosmic rays, and other astronomical phenomena. If future emotional events create subtle perturbations in this global electromagnetic field through some form of retrocausal influence, your heart might be sensitive enough to detect these changes before the events that cause them actually occur. Your nervous system provides another channel for precognitive information processing. The presentiment experiments we discussed earlier showed that your brain begins responding to future emotional stimuli seconds before they appear. But the neural mechanisms underlying this response are only beginning to be understood. Dr. Roland McCarthy and his colleagues at HeartMath have found that the brain regions most involved in precognitive processing are those associated with intuitive decision-making rather than analytical thinking. The anterior cingulate cortex, which processes emotional significance, shows strong activation during precognitive responses. The insula, which integrates internal bodily sensations with conscious awareness, also shows increased activity before future emotional stimuli. This suggests that precognitive information might be processed through the same neural networks that generate gut feelings and intuitive insights. Your brain's emotional and interoceptive systems might be naturally tuned to detect temporal information that your analytical mind can't access. The timing of these neural responses provides important clues about the mechanisms involved. Precognitive brain activity typically begins 2 to 4 seconds before future stimuli appear. This timing corresponds roughly to the duration of what neuroscientists call the specious present, the time window over which your brain integrates sensory information into coherent conscious experiences. It's as if your brain's temporal integration window extends slightly into the future as well as the past. When you experience the present moment, your brain might actually be integrating information from the immediate past, the immediate present, and the immediate future into a single conscious experience. Your skin provides yet another biological channel for precognitive information. Galvanic skin response, the electrical conductivity of your skin controlled by sweat gland activity, shows consistent changes before future emotional events. This response occurs completely outside conscious control and can't be influenced by expectations or beliefs. The skin response appears to be mediated by your sympathetic nervous system, the part of your autonomic nervous system responsible for fight or flight responses. This system is designed to prepare your body for action when threats are detected. If it's responding to future threats, it suggests that biological threat detection systems might naturally operate across multiple time dimensions. Research has shown that people with higher baseline skin conductance, those whose bodies are naturally more electrochemically active, tend to show stronger precognitive effects. This suggests that biological sensitivity to electromagnetic fields might be related to precognitive ability. Some researchers propose that precognitive information might be carried by extremely low-frequency electromagnetic waves that can penetrate biological tissues and influence neural activity. These waves could originate from future events through retrocausal processes and be detected by the electromagnetic sensing capabilities of living systems. Your gut provides perhaps the most intriguing biological mechanism for precognitive processing. The enteric nervous system we discussed earlier doesn't just communicate with your brain, it also appears to be sensitive to subtle changes in your body's electromagnetic environment. The gut contains large concentrations of serotonin, dopamine, and other neurotransmitters typically associated with brain function. But unlike the brain, the gut isn't protected by a blood-brain barrier, making it potentially more sensitive to external electromagnetic influences. If precognitive information is carried by electromagnetic signals, the gut might be an ideal biological antenna for detecting these signals. Recent research has also revealed the importance of the gut microbiome, the trillions of bacteria living in your digestive system, in influencing brain function and emotional states. These microorganisms produce neurotransmitters and communicate with your nervous system through multiple pathways. Remarkably, some studies suggest that the gut microbiome might be sensitive to G-magnetic fluctuations and other environmental electromagnetic changes. If future events create subtle electromagnetic perturbations through retrocausal mechanisms, your gut bacteria might be among the first biological systems to detect and respond to these changes. The vagus nerve, which connects your gut to your brain, appears to be particularly important in transmitting precognitive information. A stimulation of the vagus nerve has been shown to enhance intuitive decision-making and increase sensitivity to subtle internal keys. People with higher vagal tone, stronger vagus nerve activity, tend to perform better on tasks requiring rapid, intuitive judgments. Your entire autonomic nervous system might be viewed as a biological early warning system that operates across multiple temporal dimensions. The sympathetic branch prepares your body for action when threats are detected, while the parasympathetic branch promotes rest and recovery when the environment is safe. If these systems can detect future as well as present threats and opportunities, they would provide tremendous survival advantages. This evolutionary perspective is crucial for understanding why precognitive abilities might exist. An organism that could sense future dangers would be far more likely to survive and reproduce than one limited to reacting only to present stimuli. Natural selection would strongly favor any biological mechanism that provided even a slight advantage in predicting future threats or opportunities. The fact that precognitive effects appear strongest for emotionally significant stimuli supports this evolutionary interpretation. Life-threatening situations, mating opportunities, and other evolutionarily important events would be precisely the types of future occurrences that would provide the greatest survival advantage if they could be sensed in advance. But biological precognition isn't limited to threat detection. Studies have found precognitive responses to positive emotional stimuli as well, suggesting that biological systems might be detecting future opportunities as well as future dangers. Your gut feelings about good investments, promising relationships, or beneficial opportunities might reflect your body's ability to sense positive future outcomes. The research suggests that every human being might possess latent precognitive abilities mediated by these biological mechanisms. The strength of these abilities might depend on factors like electromagnetic sensitivity, vagal tone, emotional awareness, and attentional focus. People who are naturally more sensitive to internal bodily sensations might be better able to detect and interpret precognitive information. This raises fascinating questions about the development and enhancement of precognitive abilities. If consciousness can access information from future events through biological mechanisms, might it be possible to train and amplify these capabilities? Could meditation practices that enhance interoceptive awareness also enhance precognitive sensitivity? The answers to these questions require us to explore how consciousness itself might operate at the quantum level, where the familiar boundaries between past, present, and future begin to dissolve into something far stranger and more wonderful than our everyday experience suggests. You're walking through a crowded market when suddenly everything becomes eerily familiar. You've been here before, had this exact conversation, seen these precise movements unfold in exactly this sequence, yet you know for certain you've never visited this place in your life. The sensation lasts only seconds, but it leaves you with a profound sense that you've somehow experienced this moment before it happened. Welcome to the mystery of Déjà, that uncanny feeling of having lived through the present moment at some previous time. Most people dismiss it as a quirk of memory, a glitch in the brain's information processing. But what if déjà vu is actually evidence of consciousness accessing information from your personal future timeline? What if that sense of familiarity comes not from having experienced something before, but from having glimpsed it in advance? The term déjà literally means already seen in French, and it's one of the most commonly reported alterations in consciousness. Surveys suggest that between 60 and 90% of people have experienced déjà vu at least once, with most people reporting multiple episodes throughout their lives. Traditional neuroscience explains déjà vu as a timing error in the brain's memory systems. According to this theory, sensory information somehow gets processed through long-term memory circuits before being processed by short-term memory systems, creating a false sense of familiarity. You feel like you've experienced something before because your brain mistakenly tagged the experience as a memory even though it's happening for the first time. But this conventional explanation has problems. If déjà vu were simply a memory processing error, you would expect it to involve confusion about specific details, wondering whether you really had been to a particular place before. Instead, people experiencing déjà vu typically know with certainty that they haven't had the experience before, yet simultaneously feel an overwhelming sense of familiarity. Moreover, déjà vu often involves a sense of knowing what will happen next, a predictive quality that memory processing errors wouldn't explain. People report feeling like could finish other people's sentences or pick the next song on the radio during déjà vu episodes. This predictive aspect suggests that déjà vu might involve access to future information rather than false memories of the past. Recent neuroscience research has revealed that déjà vu involves activity in brain regions associated with prediction and temporal processing rather than just memory systems. The parahippocampal cortex, which processes contextual information and spatial relationships, shows increased activity during déjà vu experiences. The anterior cingulate cortex, involved in conflict monitoring and prediction, also becomes highly active. This neural pattern suggests that déjà vu might involve your brain detecting a mismatch between predicted and actual sensory input, as if your brain were expecting certain experiences based on some form of advance information. The familiar sensation might arise when current experiences match unconscious predictions your brain made about future events. Akira O'Connor at the University of St. Andrews has proposed that déjà vu occurs when your brain's prediction systems generate unusually accurate forecasts of immediate future events. During these episodes, your predictive processing becomes so precise that the unfolding present feels like it's confirming memories you didn't know you had. This prediction-based theory of déjà vu aligns remarkably well with precognition research. If consciousness can access information from future events, déjà vu might occur when this precognitive information becomes conscious, just as the predicted events begin to unfold. The familiar sensation would arise from recognizing the correspondence between precognitive information and current experience. Some of the most compelling evidence for this interpretation comes from studies of people who experience chronic déjà vu, individuals who report nearly constant feelings of familiarity with new experiences. Rather than showing memory processing deficits, these individuals often demonstrate immense predictive abilities and increased sensitivity to environmental patterns. The timing of déjà vu episodes also supports a precognitive interpretation. Déjà vu most commonly occurs during periods of high stress, emotional intensity, or rapid environmental change. Exactly the conditions that would be most likely to generate strong precognitive information. The brain's prediction systems might become hyperactive during challenging situations, increasing the likelihood of accessing future information. Interestingly, déjà vu frequency appears to be related to other anomalous experiences. People who report frequent déjà are also more likely to report precognitive dreams, telepathic experiences, and other phenomena suggesting enhanced sensitivity to non-local information. This correlation suggests that déjà vu might be part of a broader spectrum of consciousness accessing information beyond normal spatial and temporal boundaries. The relationship between déjà vu and dreams provides another intriguing connection to precognition research. Many people report that their déjà vu experiences feel similar to recognizing something from a dream they can't quite remember. If dreams sometimes involve precognitive information, déjà vu might occur when waking experiences match predictions accessed during sleep. Research on precognitive dreams has found that people often have trouble remembering dream content until the predicted events begin to unfold in waking life. The act of experiencing the predicted event seems to retroactively activate the dream memory, creating a sudden sense of recognition. Déjà might involve a similar process where precognitive information accessed unconsciously becomes conscious when the predicted experience occurs. The phenomenology of déjà vu, the subjective quality of the experience, also resembles descriptions of recognizing cognitive information. People experiencing déjà vu often report a sense of knowing that extends beyond normal memory, accompanied by feelings of significance and inevitability. These qualities align with reports from people who successfully use precognitive information for practical decision-making. Some researchers have proposed that déjà vu might involve accessing information from parallel timelines or alternate versions of your personal history. According to quantum theories of consciousness, every decision point creates branching timelines representing different possible futures. Déjà vu might occur when your consciousness momentarily accesses information from nearby parallel timelines where similar events are unfolding. This parallel timeline theory could explain why déjà vu experiences often involve subtle differences from true memory. The familiar situation feels almost exactly like something you've experienced before, but with small details that don't quite match. These discrepancies might reflect the differences between parallel timelines rather than memory processing errors. The connection between déjà vu and precognition extends beyond theoretical speculation. Laboratory studies have found that people who experience frequent déjà vu perform better on tests of implicit precognition, tasks where they must make rapid judgments based on subtle cues about future events. Their brains seem to be naturally tuned to detect temporal information that others miss. Neuroimaging studies of people experiencing artificially induced déjà vu show activation patterns similar to those found during precognitive processing. The same brain regions involved in detecting future emotional stimuli become active during déjà vu episodes, suggesting overlapping neural mechanisms. The therapeutic implications of understanding déjà vu as precognitive experience are significant. Instead of viewing déjà vu as a meaningless neural glitch, people might learn to interpret these experiences as information about upcoming events or opportunities. Paying attention to the context and emotions associated with déjà vu episodes might provide valuable guidance for navigating future challenges. Some indigenous cultures have long interpreted déjà vu like experiences evidence of souls accessing information from future incarnations or traveling along multiple timelines simultaneously. These traditional interpretations align surprisingly well with modern quantum theories of consciousness and time. The frequency of déjà vu experiences tends to decrease with age, possibly reflecting changes in neural plasticity and temporal processing abilities. Young adults report the highest rates of déjà vu, while elderly individuals report fewer episodes. This age-related pattern might reflect the brain's changing capacity to access precognitive information across the lifespan. Understanding déjà vu as precognitive experience also raises questions about the nature of personal identity across time. If you can access information from your future experiences, in what sense are you the same person who will have those experiences? Does consciousness exist as a continuous thread connecting past, present, and future selves, or as a quantum field spanning your entire temporal existence? These questions become even more profound when we consider that déjà vu might involve accessing not just your own future experiences, but information from collective human consciousness. Some episodes of déjà vu occur in locations where many people have had similar experiences, suggesting that consciousness might access shared temporal information stored in what researchers call morphic fields, or the collective unconscious. The mystery of déjà vu ultimately points to mysteries about the nature of time itself. If consciousness can access future information, then the linear progression from past through present to future might be an illusion created by the limited perspective of embodied awareness. From a larger perspective, your entire life timeline might exist simultaneously, with consciousness moving through it like a spotlight illuminating different moments in sequence. This brings us to an even deeper question. If consciousness can transcend time, what does this reveal about the fundamental nature of biological systems? Are living organisms somehow naturally quantum mechanical, operating according to principles that transcend classical physics? For decades, Physicists believed that quantum mechanics was confined to the microscopic world of atoms and subatomic particles. Living systems, they assumed, were too large, too warm, and too chaotic to support the delicate quantum effects that only survived in carefully controlled laboratory conditions. This assumption is now crumbling as researchers discover that life itself might be fundamentally quantum mechanical. From the moment sunlight hits a leaf to the instant a bird changes direction during migration, biological systems are performing quantum computations that surpass our most advanced technologies. And if life operates through quantum processes, then consciousness, which emerges from living systems, might naturally have access to the non-local, time-transcendent properties that quantum mechanics allows. The revolution in quantum biology began in the most unlikely place: a green leaf photosynthesizing in your backyard. Photosynthesis is the process by which plants convert sunlight into chemical energy, and for over a century scientists thought they understood how it worked. Light hits chlorophyll molecules, exciting electrons that then transfer their energy through a series of protein complexes until it's captured and stored as chemical bonds. But when researchers began measuring the efficiency of this energy transfer, they discovered something impossible. Photosynthesis operates at nearly 100% efficiency, converting almost every photon of captured sunlight into usable chemical energy. This is far better performance than any human-designed solar technology has achieved. Even more remarkably, this efficiency persists even when photosynthetic systems are damaged or operating under suboptimal conditions. Plants somehow manage to transfer energy through procomplexes with an accuracy that classical physics says should be impossible in the noisy, warm environment of living cells. The solution to this mystery came from quantum mechanics. Researchers discovered that photosynthetic systems use quantum superposition to explore multiple energy transfer pathways simultaneously. Instead of energy traveling along a single route from molecule to molecule, it exists in a quantum superposition of all possible pathways until it finds the most efficient route to its destination. This is like having a maze where instead of trying different paths one at a time, you could explore all possible routes simultaneously and instantly select the shortest one. The quantum approach allows photosynthetic systems to optimize energy transfer in real time, adjusting to changing conditions with supernatural efficiency. But photosynthesis is just the beginning of quantum biology. Bird navigation provides another stunning example of quantum effects in living systems. Many species of migratory birds can navigate thousands of miles with pinpoint accuracy, using Earth's magnetic field as a compass. For decades, scientists couldn't figure out how birds could detect magnetic fields that are far too weak to influence any known biological process. The answer came from studying a protein called cryptochrome, found in the eyes of migratory birds. This protein contains pairs of electrons that become quantum entangled when exposed to blue light. Changes in magnetic field orientation affect the quantum states of these electron pairs, creating visual patterns that birds can literally see overlaid on their normal vision. Think about what this means. Birds have evolved biological quantum computers in their eyes that allow them to see magnetic fields. They navigate using quantum entanglement between electrons in their visual system. If evolution has produced quantum sensing systems for navigation, it's entirely plausible that consciousness itself might be a quantum information processing system. The implications extend far beyond navigation. If quantum entanglement can occur between electrons in bird eyes, it might also occur between quantum processes in different parts of the brain, or even between quantum processes in different brains. Consciousness might involve quantum networks that transcend individual neural systems. Quantum effects have now been discovered in numerous biological processes. Enzyme catalysis, the process by which biological molecules accelerate chemical reactions, appears to use quantum tunneling to overcome energy barriers that would otherwise make reactions impossible. Smell and taste might involve quantum processes that allow molecules to be identified by their quantum vibrational signatures rather than just their shapes. Even DNA replication and protein folding appear to involve quantum effects. The genetic code might be read through quantum processes that can detect subtle differences in quantum states of DNA bases. Proteins might fold into their proper shapes by exploring multiple folding pathways simultaneously through quantum superposition, then collapsing into the most stable configuration. But perhaps the most significant discovery for consciousness research is that quantum effects can persist in biological systems at body temperature and in the presence of environmental noise. The quantum coherence that supports photosynthesis and bird navigation survives in conditions that should destroy it almost instantly according to classical physics. This biological quantum coherence appears to be actively protected by the structure and dynamics of living systems. Instead of quantum effects being disrupted by biological processes seem designed to support and enhance quantum coherence. Life might have evolved specifically to harness quantum mechanical principles for information processing. Start Hameroff's research on microtubules, the protein structures inside neurons that we discussed earlier, provides the most direct connection between quantum biology and consciousness. Microtubules are made of tubulin proteins that can exist in multiple conformational states, creating complex networks of quantum information processing within individual brain cells. Hameroff and his colleagues have found that microtubules can maintain quantum coherence for surprisingly long periods, even in the warm, noisy environment of living neurons. The structure of these proteins appears designed to protect quantum states from environmental decoherence, allowing quantum computations to occur within brain cells. If microtubules function as biological quantum computers, then every neuron in your brain contains quantum processing capabilities that exceed our most advanced artificial systems. Your brain would be a quantum computer with 100 billion processing units, each capable of exploring multiple computational pathways simultaneously. This quantum processing power might explain how consciousness can access information that transcends normal spatial and temporal boundaries. If quantum entanglement can occur between microtubules in different neurons, your brain might function as an integrated quantum network capable of non-local information processing. Recent experiments have provided direct evidence for quantum effects in neural systems. Researchers have measured quantum coherence in microtubule proteins extracted from brain tissue. They found that anesthetics that eliminate consciousness also disrupt quantum coherence in these structures, suggesting that consciousness might require quantum processes to function. Other studies have found that electromagnetic fields that interfere with quantum coherence can alter conscious experience and decision-making abilities. Brain stimulation techniques that affect quantum processes in neural microtubules can influence everything from memory formation to emotional states. The emerging picture is that consciousness might be fundamentally quantum mechanical, operating through biological quantum computers that evolution has been developing for billions of years. Instead of being confined to individual brains, consciousness might exist as quantum fields that transcend the boundaries of individual neural systems. This quantum view of consciousness could explain how gut feelings access information from future events. If consciousness operates through quantum processes, it might naturally have access to retrocausation information flowing backward through time. Your brain's quantum computers might be constantly processing information from across your entire timeline, past and future. The biological quantum effects discovered so far might represent just the tip of the iceberg. As measurement techniques become more sensitive and theoretical understanding deepens, researchers are likely to discover quantum processes throughout biological systems. Life itself might be a quantum phenomenon that has learned to harness the deepest principles of physics for survival and reproduction. If consciousness really is quantum, then every gut feeling you experience might be evidence of your brain's quantum computers accessing information from your personal future timeline. That sense of knowing something before it happens might reflect the natural operation of biological quantum systems that evolution has been perfecting for millions of years. But this raises profound questions about the nature of time itself. If consciousness can access information from future events through quantum processes, how should we understand the relationship between past, present, and future? Are these distinct temporal categories, or are they all equally real aspects of a larger temporal structure that consciousness can navigate? What if everything you think you know about memory is wrong? What if your brain doesn't just store information about past experiences, but actually integrates data from across your entire timeline, past, present, and future, into a unified information processing system that we call consciousness? This is the radical proposition at the heart of the future memory hypothesis, that consciousness operates by accessing and integrating information from multiple points in your personal timeline simultaneously. Your memories of the past, and your experiences of the present might be fundamentally connected to information about your probable futures through quantum processes that transcend normal temporal boundaries. To understand how this might work, we need to reconsider what memory actually is at the most fundamental level. Traditional neuroscience views memory as information storage, your brain encoding experiences as patterns of neural connections that can be retrieved later. But this storage and retrieval model faces serious problems that have puzzled researchers for decades. The first problem is the binding problem. How does your brain integrate information from different sensory modalities, different brain regions, and different time periods into coherent conscious experiences? When you remember your last birthday party, your brain somehow combines visual memories of faces, auditory memories of conversations, emotional memories of feelings, and temporal memories of sequence into a single, unified recollection. Classical neuroscience suggests this integration occurs through neural networks that bind different types of information together. But no one has been able to identify the specific neural mechanisms that could accomplish this binding quickly enough to account for the speed of conscious experience. The second problem is the hard problem of consciousness. Why is there something it's like to remember? Why do memories have subjective, qualitative properties rather than just being informational data structures? Storage and retrieval models can explain how information gets encoded and accessed, but they can't explain why accessing this information feels like anything. The future memory hypothesis offers a radically different approach to both problems. Instead of viewing memory as storage of past information, it proposes that consciousness involves real-time access to information that spans your entire timeline. Your brain doesn't store memories. It accesses them by connecting to different points in your personal temporal structure. Think of it like this. Imagine your entire life as a movie that already exists in its complete form. Consciousness would be like a viewpoint moving through this movie, experiencing different scenes in sequence. But unlike watching a regular movie, consciousness might be able to access information from scenes it hasn't reached yet, creating what we experience as gut feelings, intuitions, and precognitive experiences. This model suggests that what we call memory might actually be consciousness accessing information from past points in your timeline, while what we call precognition might be consciousness accessing information from future points in your timeline. Both would involve the same basic mechanism, temporal information access. The quantum mechanical basis for this hypothesis comes from the time-symmetric nature of quantum physics. At the quantum level, the fundamental equations work equally well for information flowing forward or backward in time. If consciousness operates through quantum processes in neural microtubules, it might naturally have access to information from both temporal directions. Henry Stapp at UC Berkeley has proposed that consciousness involves quantum measurement processes that can retroactively determine the properties of past quantum states. Each moment of conscious experience might involve quantum measurements that simultaneously access information from multiple points in your timeline, creating an integrated experience that spans past, present, and future. This temporal integration might explain the binding problem. Instead of requiring complex neural network to bind information from different sources, consciousness might naturally integrate information from different temporal locations. Your memory of your birthday party would involve accessing multiple quantum states from that day, while your current experience might involve accessing quantum states from this moment, all unified through quantum entanglement across your personal timeline. The subjective quality of memory, why remembering feels like something, might arise from the quantum measurement process itself. When consciousness accesses information from past timeline positions, it doesn't just retrieve data, it experiences the quantum states that constituted your awareness at those moments. Memory wouldn't be storage and retrieval, it would be temporal revisitation. But the most radical implication of the future memory hypothesis is that your brain might be constantly accessing information from your probable futures. Every decision you make, every path you consider, every possibility you contemplate might involve your consciousness literally sampling information from potential future timeline positions. This could explain why gut feelings often provide accurate guidance for complex decisions involving uncertain outcomes. Your analytical mind might only have access to current information and past experience, but your quantum consciousness might be sampling information from future timeline positions, where different choices have played out. Your gut feelings might be your consciousness reporting back on what it discovers in these future explorations. The mechanism might work like this. When you're facing an important decision, your consciousness uses quantum processes to explore multiple future timeline branches simultaneously. It accesses information about how different choices would feel, what consequences they would produce, what emotional states they would generate. This future information gets integrated with your current awareness, creating intuitive preferences that seem to emerge from nowhere. Research on decision-making provides intriguing support for this model. Studies show that people often develop preferences for options before they consciously understand why those options are better. Their gut reactions predict the outcomes of complex decisions more accurately than their analytical reasoning. It's as if their unconscious minds have access to information about future outcomes that their conscious minds don't possess. The Iowa gambling task we discussed earlier provides a perfect example. Participants began avoiding disadvantageous card decks long before they consciously realized those decks were problematic. Their autonomic nervous systems showed stress responses when reaching for bad decks, even when they couldn't articulate why. If consciousness can access future timeline information, these responses make perfect sense. Their bodies were reacting to information about future losses their consciousness had detected through temporal sampling. The future memory hypothesis also offers a new interpretation of déjà experiences. Instead of memory processing errors, déjà might occur when your consciousness recognizes correspondence between current experiences and information it previously accessed from your future timeline. The familiar sensation would arise from literally recognizing a future you had already visited mentally. Dreams might play a crucial role in future information access during sleep. When analytical thinking is suppressed and neural activity patterns change dramatically, consciousness might be freed to explore future timeline positions more extensively. Precognitive dreams would involve supernatural abilities. They would involve natural processes of temporal information access that occur when normal waking constraints are removed. The emotional dimension of gut feelings makes sense from this perspective. If consciousness accesses future information by literally experiencing quantum states from different timeline positions, emotionally significant futures would create stronger impressions than neutral ones. Your gut feelings about major life decisions would reflect the emotional impact of actually experiencing those different futures at the quantum level. This emotional weighting might explain why precognitive experiences often involve threats, opportunities, or other emotionally significant events. These future occurrences would create stronger quantum impressions that are more likely to influence current consciousness. Your survival-oriented nervous system would be naturally tuned to detect and respond to future information that could affect your well-being. The future memory hypothesis suggests that consciousness might be far more temporally extended than we realize. Instead of being confined to the present moment, your awareness might span across your entire lifetime line, with different aspects of your consciousness accessing different temporal positions simultaneously. What you experience as the present moment might be just one focal point in a much larger temporal awareness structure. This temporal extension of consciousness could explain many anomalous experiences that don't fit conventional neuroscience models. Terminal lucidity. When people with dementia suddenly regain clarity shortly before death, might involve consciousness accessing future timeline positions where neural function is restored or transcended. Near-death experiences might involve consciousness accessing information from post-mortem timeline positions. Even ordinary experiences might involve future information access more than we realize. When you meet someone new and instantly like or dislike them, when you feel drawn to live in a particular city, when you choose a career path that feels right. All of these decisions might be informed by your consciousness accessing information about how these choices will unfold across your future timeline. The practical implications are staggering. If consciousness really can access future information through quantum processes, then developing your sensitivity to gut feelings might be one of the most valuable skills you can cultivate. Instead of dismissing intuitive impressions as irrational, you might learn to interpret them as reports from reconnaissance missions your consciousness has conducted in your probable futures. Meditation practices that enhance present moment awareness might also enhance temporal information access. by quieting analytical thinking and increasing sensitivity to subtle mental states. Mindfulness training might help you detect and interpret the subtle impressions that arise when consciousness accesses future timeline information. But the future memory hypothesis raises profound questions about free will and determinism. If consciousness can access information about future events, does this mean the future is fixed and predetermined? Or are multiple futures possible, with consciousness exploring different probability branches and potentially influencing which ones become actual? The quantum mechanical framework suggests that both determinism and free will might be partially correct. Future events might exist as probability distributions rather than fixed outcomes, with consciousness able to access information about likely futures while also participating in determining which probabilities become actualized. Your gut feelings might be reports from explorations of your most probable futures, while your conscious choices might influence the probability distributions themselves. The act of accessing future information might be one of the ways consciousness participates in creating the future it accesses. This recursive relationship between consciousness and time suggests that reality might be far more participatory than classical physics assumed. Instead of consciousness being a passive observer of predetermined events, it might be an active participant in an ongoing creation process where awareness and reality co-evolve across time. Understanding consciousness as temporally extended through quantum processes would revolutionize psychology, neuroscience, philosophy, and our fundamental understanding of what it means to be human. We wouldn't just be biological machines responding to current stimuli based on past programming. We would be quantum temporal beings with natural access to information spanning our entire existence. But even if the future memory hypothesis is correct, critics will argue that conventional explanations can account for most apparent precognitive experiences without requiring exotic physics. The skeptical challenge to precognition research remains formidable, and addressing these criticisms is crucial for establishing the scientific credibility of consciousness research. Before we go any further down this rabbit hole of quantum consciousness and temporal information access, we need to address the elephant in the room. Most scientists remain deeply skeptical of precognition research, and they have good reasons. The history of science is littered with extraordinary claims that seemed compelling at first, but crumbled under careful scrutiny. So let's take off our speculative physics hats for a moment and examine the skeptical arguments with the seriousness they deserve. The most fundamental criticism of precognition research is what we might call the extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence principle, popularized by Carl Sagan. Precognition violates our most basic understanding of causality, the principle that causes must precede effects. If consciousness can access future information, it would overturn centuries of scientific understanding about the nature of time, causation, and physical reality. Given the magnitude of this claim, skeptics argue that the evidence would need to be absolutely overwhelming, far stronger than what's typically required for more conventional scientific findings. They point out that the effect sizes in precognition studies are typically very small, often just a few percentage points above chance. While these effects might be statistically significant, they're nowhere near the kind of dramatic evidence you'd expect for such revolutionary claims. Dr. Ray Hyman, a psychologist at the University of Oregon who has spent decades evaluating parapsychological research, argues that small effect sizes make precognition studies particularly vulnerable to subtle methodological flaws, experimenter bias, and statistical artifacts. Even tiny systematic errors or unconscious influences could create apparent effects that seem statistically significant but don't reflect genuine precognitive abilities. The replication crisis provides another major concern. Many precognition studies have failed to replicate when conducted by independent researchers, especially those who approach the research with skeptical perspectives. Critics argue that this inconsistency indicates that the original positive results were probably due to statistical flukes, methodological problems, or other artifacts rather than genuine precognitive phenomena. Stout Ritchie at King's College London has pointed out that precognition research seems to suffer from what's called the decline effect. Positive results tend to get smaller or disappear entirely as experimental methods become more rigorous and sample sizes increase. This pattern is exactly what you'd expect if the original results were due to methodological artifacts rather than real effects. The file drawer problem presents another challenge. Researchers and journals are much more likely to publish positive results than negative ones, potentially creating a biased impression of the evidence. For every published study showing precognitive effects, there might be numerous unpublished studies that found nothing. This publication bias could make precognitive abilities seem more established than they actually are. Skeptics also point to numerous specific methodological concerns in precognition research. Random number generators might not be truly random, allowing unconscious detection of patterns. Timing systems might have microscopic delays that provide subtle cues about upcoming stimuli. Data analysis might involve fishing expeditions, where researchers try multiple statistical approaches until they find significant results. The sensory leakage problem is particularly important for remote viewing and similar studies. Even tiny amounts of normal sensory information, sounds, vibrations, electromagnetic fields, chemical traces, that could provide enough data for unconscious pattern recognition to simulate precognitive abilities. Completely eliminating all possible sensory channels is extremely difficult, and apparent precognitive hits might result from processing subtle cues that researchers didn't realize they were providing. Cognitive biases present another category of alternative explanations. Confirmation bias leads people to notice and remember apparent precognitive hits while forgetting or discounting misses. The Texas sharpshooter fallacy involves retroactively finding patterns in random data by selectively focusing on apparent correspondences while ignoring inconsistencies. Cold reading techniques used by professional psychics demonstrate how skilled practitioners can create impressive demonstrations of apparent psychic ability using only psychological manipulation and general knowledge about human behavior. Many supposed precognitive experiences might result from similar unconscious processes where people make educated guesses based on available information, then remember their successful predictions while forgetting their failures. The false memory problem is particularly relevant for precognitive dreams and similar experiences. People might unconsciously modify their memories of dreams or premonitions to better match subsequent events, creating a false impression of precognitive accuracy. Memory is highly reconstructive, and the emotional impact of dramatic events can further distort recollections of prior experiences. Statistical regression to the mean provides another alternative explanation. In any large dataset, some results will inevitably appear extreme due to random variation. If researchers focus on the most impressive results while ignoring less dramatic outcomes, they might mistake normal statistical variation for evidence of precognitive abilities. The multiple comparisons problem occurs when researchers test many different hypotheses or analyze data in numerous ways without correcting for the increased probability of finding false positives. If you conduct enough statistical tests, you'll eventually find some that appear significant purely by chance, even when no real effects exist. Expectancy effects and experimenter bias can influence results even in double-blind studies. Researchers' unconscious expectations might affect how they design experiments, collect data, or interact with participants in ways that subtly influence outcomes. Participants might pick up on researchers' expectations through micro-expressions, tone of voice, or other subtle cues. The social psychology of belief provides yet another layer of alternative explanations. People who believe in precognitive abilities might be more motivated to participate in studies, more likely to report positive experiences, and more prone to interpret ambiguous results as supportive evidence. This self-selection bias could create apparent effects even when no genuine precognitive abilities exist. Skeptics also argue that proponents of precognition research often engage in special pleading, modifying their theories whenever contradictory evidence emerges, rather than accepting that their hypotheses might be wrong. If precognitive abilities are real, why don't they work reliably enough to provide practical benefits? Why can't precognitive remote viewers consistently predict lottery numbers or stock market movements? The goalpost shifting problem occurs when researchers continually adjust their criteria for what counts as evidence for precognition. If laboratory studies show effects, critics point out that real-world applications don't work. If some real-world applications seem successful, critics note that they're not reliable enough for practical use. Proponents then argue that precognitive abilities work differently under different conditions, but skeptics see this as avoiding falsification rather than genuinely testing hypotheses. Dr. Susan Blackmore, a psychologist who initially believed in psychic phenomena but became skeptical after conducting her own research, argues that the parapsychological community has had over a century to demonstrate repeatable precognitive effects under controlled conditions. The fact that such demonstrations remain elusive despite enormous effort suggests that precognitive abilities probably don't exist. The theoretical implausibility argument holds that precognition would require violations of well-established physical principles. While quantum mechanics does allow for some seemingly causal phenomena, these effects don't permit information transfer across macroscopic distances or time intervals. The gap between quantum mechanical possibilities and the kinds of precognitive effects claimed in parapsychological research remains enormous. Evolutionary arguments also raise questions about precognitive abilities. If such abilities provided survival advantages, we would expect natural selection to have optimized them over millions of years of evolution. The fact that precognitive abilities, if they exist at all, seem to be weak, unreliable, and highly variable suggests they're probably artifacts rather than genuine biological capabilities. These skeptical arguments are serious and deserve careful consideration. Many apparent precognitive experiences can probably be explained through conventional mechanisms involving unconscious pattern recognition, statistical coincidence, memory distortion, or other well-understood psychological processes. However, the skeptical position also has limitations. The demand for extraordinary evidence can sometimes become a moving goalpost that no amount of data could satisfy. The consistent finding of small, but statistically significant effects across numerous independent studies suggests that something interesting might be happening, even if it's not as dramatic as popular representations of psychic abilities suggest. Moreover, some skeptical arguments make assumptions that might not be warranted. The claim that precognition violates physical laws assumes that our current understanding of physics is complete and final. But physics has undergone numerous revolutionary changes throughout history, and quantum mechanics has already revealed phenomena that seem to violate classical intuitions about causality and locality. The replication failures might reflect the genuine difficulty of studying consciousness-related phenomena, rather than indicating that such phenomena don't exist. If precognitive abilities depend on subtle psychological states, emotional factors, or environmental conditions that are difficult to control, inconsistent replication might be expected even if the effects are real. Perhaps most importantly, dismissing all precognition research based on skeptical arguments might cause us to overlook genuine discoveries about the nature of consciousness and time. The history of science includes numerous examples of phenomena that seemed impossible until theoretical frameworks developed to accommodate them. The challenge for consciousness researchers is to address skeptical concerns while continuing to investigate potentially revolutionary discoveries. This requires developing better experimental methods, larger sample sizes, more rigorous controls, and theoretical frameworks that can make testable predictions about when and how precognitive effects should occur. Rather than ending our inquiry, the skeptical challenge should motivate more careful, more creative, and more rigorous research into the mysteries of consciousness and time. If gut feelings really are memories from the future, the evidence should ultimately be compelling enough to satisfy even reasonable skeptics. But what if consciousness operates according to principles that transcend our current scientific paradigms entirely? What if we're living in multiple parallel timelines simultaneously, with gut feelings providing information about experiences occurring in alternate versions of reality? What if every decision you make doesn't just determine your future, but literally splits reality into multiple parallel universes where every possible choice plays out simultaneously? What if your consciousness isn't confined to a single timeline, but somehow spans across multiple versions of reality, accessing information from parallel selves living different lives in alternate universes? This isn't just science fiction speculation. It's one of the most serious interpretations of quantum mechanics proposed by some of the world's leading physicists. And if this many worlds interpretation is correct, it might provide the most elegant explanation yet for how gut feelings can provide accurate information about events that seem impossible to predict. The many worlds interpretation was first proposed by physicist Hugh Everett Hoyer in 1957 as a solution to one of the deepest mysteries in quantum mechanics, the measurement problem. When quantum systems are not being observed, they exist in superposition, multiple states simultaneously. But when you measure them, they seem to collapse into a single definite state. What happens to all the other possibilities? Everett proposed a radical answer: nothing collapses. Instead, every possible outcome of every quantum measurement actually occurs in separate, parallel universes. When you measure a quantum particle that could be spinning either up or down, reality splits into two branches, one where you measure spin up, and another where you measure spin down. Both outcomes happen, but in different versions of reality. This splitting process occurs constantly, at every moment, for every quantum interaction throughout the universe. The result is an ever-branching multiverse where every possible version of reality exists simultaneously. There are versions of the universe where you chose to watch this video, and versions where you didn't. Versions where you were born in different countries, pursued different careers, married different people, made different choices at every decision point in your life. The implications are mind-boggling. If the many worlds interpretation is correct, then every possible version of your life is playing out simultaneously in parallel universes. There are versions of you that became doctors instead of whatever profession you actually chose. Versions that moved to different cities. Versions that made different investment decisions, took different risks, followed different paths entirely. But here's where it gets really interesting for consciousness research. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest that consciousness might not be confined to a single timeline. Your awareness might somehow span across multiple parallel versions of yourself, accessing information from alternate timelines where different choices have played out. Max Tegmark at MIT has proposed that consciousness might involve quantum coherence effects that could theoretically allow access to information from nearby parallel universes. If the quantum states that generate consciousness in your brain are similar enough to the quantum states in parallel versions of your brain, quantum entanglement might create bridges between different timeline branches. This could provide a revolutionary explanation for gut feelings and intuitive decision-making. When you're faced with an important choice, your consciousness might be accessing information from parallel versions of yourself who have already made different decisions. Your gut feelings about which option to choose might be based on literal experiences of parallel selves who have lived through the consequences of each choice. Think about how this might work in practice. You're considering whether to accept a job offer in a different city. Analytically, you weigh the pros and cons: higher salary versus leaving friends behind, better career opportunities versus uncertainty about the new environment. But underneath this analysis, you have a gut feeling that the move is either right or wrong. According to the parallel timeline hypothesis, this gut feeling might arise from your consciousness accessing information from parallel versions of yourself. In some timelines, the version of you that accepted the job offer is thriving, enjoying the new challenges, making great friends, advancing rapidly in their career. In other timelines, the version that accepted the offer is struggling, feeling isolated, regretting the decision, wishing they had stayed home. Your gut feeling might be your consciousness somehow detecting the emotional resonance from these parallel experiences. If most of the timelines where you accept the offer lead to positive outcomes, you might feel drawn to accept. If most lead to negative outcomes, you might feel reluctant to move, even if you can't articulate why. This interpretation could explain why gut feelings seem to be most accurate for emotionally significant decisions. Major life choices, career changes, relationship decisions, major purchases, health choices would create the strongest differences between parallel timelines. The emotional contrast between parallel outcomes would create stronger signals that your consciousness could detect across timeline boundaries. The mechanism might involve what physicists call quantum decoherence, the process by which quantum superposition gives way to classical, definite outcomes. If consciousness involves quantum processes that maintain some degree of coherence even after decoherence occurs in the physical world, your awareness might retain access to information from parallel quantum branches that become physically separated. Amit Goswami has proposed that consciousness itself might be the fundamental reality that observes quantum systems and causes them to manifest as particular outcomes. In this interpretation, consciousness doesn't emerge from physical processes. Physical processes emerge from consciousness. If this is true, then consciousness might naturally have access to information from all parallel quantum branches before they separate into distinct physical realities. The parallel timeline hypothesis could also explain the mysterious phenomenon of quantum entanglement. When particles become entangled, measuring one instantly affects the other regardless of the distance between them. Einstein called this spooky action at a distance because it seemed to violate the speed of light on information transfer. But in the many worlds interpretation, entangled particles aren't actually communicating across space. Instead, the measurement process is revealing which branch of the multiverse you're in. The particles were always correlated across all branches. The measurement simply determines which branch your consciousness happens to be experiencing. If consciousness can navigate between parallel timeline branches, quantum entanglement might be a special case of a more general phenomenon where awareness can access non-local information from across the multiverse. Your gut feelings might involve a similar process, detecting correlations between parallel versions of yourself across different timeline branches. This perspective offers a new interpretation of déjà vu experiences. Instead of false memories or temporal processing errors, the déjà vu might occur when your consciousness momentarily accesses memories from a parallel version of yourself who has experienced similar events in a nearby timeline. The familiar sensation would arise from literally recognizing experiences from an alternate version of your life. Precognitive dreams might work similarly. During sleep, when normal waking consciousness is suppressed, your awareness might be freed to explore alternate timeline branches more extensively. Dreams about future events might be actual experiences from parallel timelines where those events have already occurred, accessed when your consciousness is less constrained by the physical brain's normal operating modes. The parallel timeline hypothesis could even explain some of the inconsistencies in precognition research. If consciousness accesses information from multiple parallel futures simultaneously, the accuracy of precognitive impressions would depend on how many timeline branches contain the predicted event. Events that occur in most parallel futures would be easier to predict than events that occur in only some branches. Moreover, the act of making a precognitive prediction might itself influence which timeline branch becomes your experienced reality. If consciousness participates in determining which quantum outcomes become actualized, then predicting a future event might increase the probability that the predicted event occurs in your particular timeline branch. This creates a fascinating recursive relationship between consciousness and reality. Your gut feelings provide information about probable futures across multiple timelines, but the act of paying attention to these gut feelings might influence which future becomes actualized in your experienced timeline. Consciousness wouldn't just be observing reality, it would be participating in creating the specific version of reality it experiences. The implications for personal development and decision-making are profound. Instead of seeing yourself as trapped in a single timeline determined by past choices, you might understand yourself as navigating through a landscape of parallel possibilities. Your decisions don't just determine your future, they determine which version of the multiverse you experience. This perspective could transform how you approach major life decisions. Instead of agonizing over whether you're making the right choice, you might recognize that all possible choices are being made by parallel versions of yourself. Your task becomes not finding the objectively correct decision, but choosing which version of reality you want to experience. Developing sensitivity to gut feelings and intuitive impressions might be a way of enhancing your ability to navigate between parallel timelines effectively. By learning to detect and interpret the subtle signals from parallel selves, you might become more skilled at choosing timeline branches that lead to fulfilling and successful outcomes. But the parallel timeline hypothesis raises profound questions about personal identity and moral responsibility. If multiple versions of yourself are making different choices simultaneously, which one is the real you? Are you responsible for the actions of parallel selves in alternate timelines? Do the experiences of parallel versions of yourself matter morally even if you don't directly experience them? These questions become even more complex when we consider the possibility that future technology might allow more direct access to parallel timeline information. If consciousness research leads to technologies that can amplify or clarify gut feelings and intuitive impressions, we might develop the ability to consciously navigate between parallel realities. Such technologies would raise unprecedented ethical and practical questions. Who would have access to parallel timeline information? How would society function if some people could routinely access information from alternate versions of reality? What would happen to concepts like privacy, free will, and individual responsibility in a world where parallel timeline navigation becomes commonplace. The parallel timeline hypothesis represents one of the most radical possible explanations for gut feelings and precognitive experiences. While it's grounded in serious interpretations of quantum mechanics, it requires us to completely reimagine the nature of consciousness, identity, and reality itself. Whether or not consciousness actually spans multiple timelines, the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics forces us to confront fundamental questions about the nature of reality and our place within it. And if future technology allows us to enhance our natural sensitivity to temporal and parallel information, we might discover capabilities that transform what it means to be human. Imagine a world where gut feelings aren't just subtle hunches you might choose to follow or ignore, but clear, reliable information streams that you can tune into as easily as checking your smartphone. Picture technologies that can amplify your natural precognitive abilities, filter out the noise from temporal information signals, and provide precise guidance about optimal choices across multiple timeline branches. This isn't just fantasy, it's the logical next step in consciousness research. If gut feelings really do involve accessing information from future events or parallel timelines, then developing technologies to enhance and clarify these natural capabilities could revolutionize everything from personal decision-making to global problem-solving. The foundation for such technologies already exists in emerging neurotechnology research. Brain-computer interfaces are becoming increasingly sophisticated, capable of detecting and interpreting neural signals with unprecedented precision. Companies like Neuralink are developing implants that can read neural activity and translate it into control signals for external devices. But current brain-computer interfaces focus primarily on motor control and basic communication, helping paralyzed patients control robotic arms or type messages by thinking about movements. The next generation of neurotechnology will likely target more subtle aspects of neural activity, including the brain states associated with intuitive decision-making and temporal information processing. Dr. Julia Mossbridge at the Institute for Noetic Sciences has been developing what she calls positive technology, systems designed to enhance human capabilities rather than replace them. Her research focuses on creating biofeedback systems that can detect the physiological signatures of precognitive processing and provide real-time feedback to help people recognize and interpret these signals. The basic concept is elegantly simple. If precognitive information processing involves measurable changes in heart rate variability, skin conductance, brainwave patterns, and other physiological markers, then sensitive monitoring equipment could detect these changes and alert users when precognitive processing is occurring. Instead of relying on subtle gut feelings that are easy to miss or misinterpret, people could receive clear, objective indications of when their consciousness is accessing temporal information. Early prototypes of such systems already exist. Hartmouth Institute has developed heart rate variability monitors that can detect the cardiac signatures of intuitive processing. Users wear sensors that measure their heart rhythms and provide real-time feedback about their coherent states, the degree to which their heart, mind, and emotions are operating in sync. Research shows that when people achieve high coherence states, they perform better on tests of intuitive decision-making and show stronger precognitive effects in laboratory experiments. By training people to recognize and maintain these optimal states, heart rate variability biofeedback might be enhancing their natural ability to access temporal information. But this is just the beginning. Advanced neurotechnology could monitor multiple physiological signals simultaneously: brain waves, heart rhythms, skin conductance, pupil dilation, muscle tension, breathing patterns, and use machine learning algorithms to identify the unique signatures associated with different types of temporal information processing. Imagine wearing a device that could distinguish between the physiological patterns associated with sensing future opportunities versus future threats, short-term versus long-term temporal information, high confidence versus low confidence precognitive impressions. Such a system could provide nuanced guidance about when to trust your gut feelings and how to interpret them. The next step would be developing technologies that don't just detect precognitive processing, but actively enhance it. If consciousness accesses temporal information through quantum processes in neural microtubules, then electromagnetic fields tuned to specific frequencies might be able to amplify these quantum effects. Sturt Hameroff has proposed that consciousness involves quantum oscillations in microtubule proteins at frequencies around 40 Hz, the same frequency associated with conscious binding and attention. Electromagnetic stimulation at these frequencies might be able to enhance quantum coherence in neural microtubules, potentially amplifying natural precognitive abilities. Transcranial electrical stimulation and transcranial magnetic stimulation are already being used therapeutically to treat depression, anxiety, and other neurological conditions. These techniques use precisely controlled electromagnetic fields to influence brain activity in targeted regions. Similar approaches might be used to enhance the brain regions most involved in temporal information processing. The anterior cingulate cortex and insular cortex, which show strong activity during precognitive processing, could be specifically targeted with electromagnetic stimulation designed to enhance their sensitivity to temporal information. Users might be able to temporarily amplify their precognitive abilities when facing important decisions or challenging situations. Virtual and augmented reality technologies could provide another avenue for enhancing precognitive abilities. If consciousness accesses parallel timeline information, then VR systems might be able to simulate multiple possible futures and allow users to experientially explore different choice outcomes before making actual decisions. Advanced AI systems could analyze vast databases of human choice outcomes and create highly realistic simulations of how different decisions typically play out. While not providing genuine future information, these systems might approximate the experience of accessing parallel timeline data by allowing users to virtually experience the consequences of different choices. Quantum computing might eventually provide even more direct approaches to temporal information access. If consciousness involves quantum processes, then quantum computers might be able to interface directly with these processes and amplify their temporal information processing capabilities. Quantum entanglement between quantum computer systems and neural quantum processes might create artificial amplification of natural precognitive abilities. Users could potentially access quantum computational power to enhance their ability to explore probability spaces and parallel timeline branches. Meditation and consciousness-altering technologies could provide another pathway for enhancing temporal information access. Advanced biofeedback systems could guide users into specific brain states associated with enhanced precognitive processing, while neurostimulation technologies could help maintain these optimal states for longer periods. Float tanks, sensory deprivation environments, binaural beat audio, and other consciousness-altering technologies might be optimized specifically for enhancing temporal information processing. Instead of general relaxation or altered states, these systems could be tuned to produce the specific neural conditions that maximize access to future information. Pharmaceutical approaches might also play a role. If precognitive abilities involve specific neurotransmitter systems or neural receptors, then targeted medications might be able to enhance temporal information processing. Psychedelic compounds like psilocybin and LSD already show promise for enhancing creative problem-solving and insight generation, effects that might involve accessing non-ordinary sources of information. The social and economic implications of precognitive enhancement technologies would be staggering. If some individuals had reliable access to future information, traditional concepts of fairness, competition, and market efficiency would be completely disrupted. Financial markets couldn't function normally if some traders had consistent access to information about future price movements. Regulatory frameworks would need to be developed to address the ethical implications of precognitive enhancement. Should such technologies be available to everyone, or restricted to specific applications? How would society maintain fairness and equality if some people had significantly enhanced temporal information access? Privacy concerns would also be paramount. If technologies could detect and interpret the temporal information processing of other individuals, personal mental privacy could be compromised in unprecedented ways. The ability to read someone's precognitive impressions might be equivalent to accessing their future decision-making processes. Military and intelligence applications would inevitably be pursued. Governments would want to develop precognitive enhancement technologies for strategic planning, threat detection, and tactical advantage. The prospect of soldiers or intelligence analysts with enhanced ability to sense future events could fundamentally alter the nature of conflict and security. Medical applications might provide more immediately beneficial uses. If precognitive abilities could help healthcare providers anticipate patient complications, disease outbreaks, or treatment responses, such technologies could save countless lives. Early warning systems based on enhanced temporal information processing might revolutionize preventive medicine. Environmental and disaster prediction could be another crucial application. If collective human consciousness can sense approaching natural disasters or environmental changes, technologies that aggregate and interpret this information might provide early warning systems that could save entire communities from catastrophic events. The development timeline for such technologies would depend on advances in multiple fields simultaneously. Better understanding of the neural basis of consciousness, improvements in brain-computer interface technology, advances in quantum computing, and breakthroughs in our understanding of time and causality would all contribute to making precognitive enhancement technologies feasible. Current research suggests that basic precognitive detection and feedback systems could be available within the next decade. More advanced enhancement technologies might require 20-50 years of additional development, while truly sophisticated quantum-enhanced temporal information systems might be century-scale projects. But even basic precognitive enhancement technologies could have transformative effects on human capabilities and society. The ability to receive clear, reliable guidance about future outcomes could revolutionize personal decision-making, reduce anxiety about uncertain choices, and help people navigate complex life challenges more effectively. Understanding that such technologies are possible, even if they're still years away, changes how we might think about developing our natural precognitive abilities in the present. Every time you pay attention to a gut feeling, every time you follow an intuitive hunch, every time you trust your instincts over pure analysis, you might be training the very capabilities that future technologies will amplify. The prospect of enhanced precognitive abilities raises fundamental questions about human agency and the nature of time itself. If consciousness can access future information, what does this mean for free will, moral responsibility, and the basic structure of human experience? If consciousness can truly access information from future events, then you are not who you think you are. You're not a biological organism trapped in the present moment, making decisions based only on past experience and current information. You're something far more extraordinary, a temporal being whose awareness spans across your entire life timeline, a consciousness time machine capable of navigating through past, present, and future with abilities you're only beginning to understand. This realization forces us to completely reconsider fundamental questions about identity, free will, and the nature of human experience. If your consciousness can access future information, then the boundaries between past, present, and future selves might be far more fluid than anyone imagined. Who you are right now might be intimately connected to who you will become in ways that transcend normal temporal causation. Consider what it means for personal identity if consciousness spans multiple timeline positions simultaneously. Traditional psychology assumes that you are a continuous self extending from your past through your present toward an unknown future. Your identity is constructed from memories of past experiences, your current personality and circumstances, and your plans and hopes for the future. But if consciousness can access actual information from future timeline positions, then future versions of yourself might be as real and present to your current awareness as past versions are through memory. You might literally be in communication with your future self through quantum entanglement across time, receiving guidance and information from timeline positions you haven't reached yet. This creates a profound paradox about the nature of selfhood. Are you the same person as your future self, or are you receiving information from someone else who happens to share your timeline? If consciousness can access multiple temporal positions simultaneously, then the concept of a singular, present moment self might be an illusion created by the limited perspective of ordinary awareness. Your gut feelings might be messages from future versions of yourself who have already lived through the consequences of decisions you're currently contemplating. When you sense that accepting a job offer will lead to happiness, or that entering a particular relationship will end badly, you might be receiving reports from timeline positions where these outcomes have already played out. The implications for moral responsibility are staggering. If your decisions are influenced by information from future selves, are you truly responsible for your choices? Or are you participating in a larger temporal feedback loop where future outcomes influence present decisions, which in turn create the conditions that lead to those future outcomes. This temporal feedback creates what philosophers call bootstrap paradoxes, situations where effects become their own causes. If you avoid an accident because your future self warns you about it, but you only avoid the accident because you received the warning, where did the information about the accident originally come from? Such paradoxes suggest that causation might be far more complex and non-linear than our normal understanding assumes. Instead of simple chains where a cause is B which cause C, consciousness might operate through temporal loops where future events participate in creating the conditions that make those events possible. Dr. Michael Lockwood at Oxford University has proposed that consciousness might involve what he calls backward causation through time, a process where conscious decisions are informed by their own future consequences through quantum mechanical processes that transcend normal temporal boundaries. This backward causation could explain why gut feelings often guide us toward outcomes that seem impossible to predict through normal analysis. Your future self, having experienced the consequences of different choices, might be able to influence your present decision-making through quantum entanglement across your personal timeline. The experience of free will takes on completely new meaning in this context. Instead of freedom from causation, free will might involve the ability to participate consciously in temporal feedback loops where awareness and choice co-evolve across multiple timeline positions. You would be genuinely free because your choices are informed by actual knowledge of their consequences, not despite being influenced by future outcomes. This temporal model of consciousness could revolutionize our understanding of personal development and life planning. Instead of setting goals based on current desires and limited future projections, you might learn to listen for guidance from future timeline positions where your deeper potentials have been actualized. Career decisions, relationship choices, creative projects, life transitions. All of these major life directions might benefit from accessing information from future selves who have explored different paths. Your consciousness time machine might provide the ultimate career counseling service. Direct consultation with versions of yourself who have already lived through different professional trajectories. The therapeutic implications are equally profound. Many psychological problems involve anxiety about the future, regret about the past, or feeling trapped by current circumstances. Understanding consciousness as temporally extended could provide entirely new approaches to healing psychological distress. Instead of being victimized by past trauma or paralyzed by future uncertainty, you might learn to access timeline positions where healing has occurred or where challenging situations have been successfully resolved. Depression and anxiety might partially reflect disconnection from future timeline positions where well-being has been restored. Dr. Larry Dossey has written extensively about what he calls nonical mind, consciousness that transcends the boundaries of individual brains and spans across space and time. His research into prayer and healing suggests that consciousness might be able to access information and influence events across both spatial and temporal distances. If consciousness really can transcend normal temporal boundaries, then meditation and contemplative practices might be methods for enhancing temporal awareness rather than just achieving present moment focus. Advanced meditators who report experiences of timelessness might be accessing expanded temporal consciousness that spans across their entire life timeline. The mystical literature from various spiritual traditions contains numerous descriptions of consciousness experiences that sound remarkably similar to accessing future information. Prophetic visions, divine guidance, and spiritual insights might all involve natural temporal information processing capabilities that become accessible when ordinary analytical thinking is transcended. But perhaps the most profound implication of consciousness as a time machine involves death and what comes after. If awareness can access future timeline positions, what happens when consciousness reaches the end of its biological timeline? Does awareness continue to exist in some form, or does it simply terminate when the brain dies? Some interpretations of quantum consciousness theory suggest that awareness might transcend biological death by accessing timeline positions that extend beyond physical life. Near-death experiences, with their reports of life reviews and encounters with deceased relatives, might involve consciousness accessing post-mortem timeline positions. The life review phenomenon, where people report experiencing their entire life history instantaneously during near-death states, sounds remarkably like consciousness accessing all timeline positions simultaneously rather than just the present moment. If awareness normally spans across entire life timelines, then the life review might represent the natural state of consciousness when it's not constrained by biological brain limitations. Even more remarkably, some near-death experiences report receiving information about future events that later prove accurate. These precognitive aspects of near-death experiences might involve consciousness accessing timeline positions that extend beyond the biographical death event. Reincarnation experiences, where people report memories of previous lives, might involve consciousness accessing timeline positions from parallel incarnations or alternate biographical trajectories. If awareness can navigate between different temporal positions, it might also be able to access information from entirely different life timelines. But we don't need to rely on extraordinary experiences to appreciate the implications of consciousness as a time machine. Every moment of every day, awareness might involve temporal navigation that we simply don't recognize. When you remember the past, you might be literally revisiting previous timeline positions. When you plan for the future, you might be actually sampling information from upcoming timeline positions. The present moment, which seems like the only real time, might actually be just one focal point in a much larger temporal awareness structure. Your consciousness might naturally span across your entire life timeline, with what you experience as now being a moving spotlight of focused attention rather than the totality of your temporal existence. This perspective could transform how you approach major life decisions. Instead of agonizing over choices based on limited information and uncertain outcomes, you might learn to consult your consciousness time machine for guidance from timeline positions where different choices have played out. The key might be developing what we could call temporal intelligence, the ability to recognize, interpret, and act upon information from different timeline positions. Just as emotional intelligence involves recognizing and working skillfully with emotional states, temporal intelligence might involve recognizing and working skillfully with information from across your personal timeline. Developing temporal intelligence might require practices that enhance present moment awareness while simultaneously opening to information from other temporal positions. This sounds paradoxical, but it might reflect the true nature of consciousness as simultaneously focused and expansive, present-centered and temporally extended. Your gut feelings might be one of the most accessible entry points into temporal intelligence. Every time you sense something about a future outcome, every time you have an intuitive knowing about how a situation will unfold, every time you feel drawn toward or away from particular choices, you might be receiving information from your consciousness time machine. Learning to trust and act upon these temporal information signals could be one of the most practical skills you can develop. In a world of increasing complexity and rapid change, the ability to access information from future timeline positions could provide crucial advantages for navigating uncertainty and making optimal decisions. But temporal intelligence raises profound questions about human evolution and the future of consciousness itself. If awareness can truly transcend temporal boundaries, what might this mean for the next stages of human development? Are we on the verge of discoveries that will revolutionize our understanding of what it means to be conscious, to be human, to exist in time? We stand at the threshold of what might be the most profound revolution in human understanding since the discovery of quantum mechanics. For the first time in history, science is developing the tools and theoretical frameworks necessary to seriously investigate consciousness, time, and the mysterious phenomenon we call intuition. What our ancestors dismissed as supernatural, and what modern skeptics reject as delusion might soon be recognized as natural capabilities that emerge from the deepest principles of physics and biology. The transformation is already underway in laboratories around the world. Researchers are no longer asking whether precognitive abilities exist, they're asking how they work, when they occur, and what biological and psychological factors influence their accuracy. The focus has shifted from proving the impossible to understanding the mechanisms behind phenomena that repeatedly demonstrate statistical significance under controlled conditions. Dean Radin's presentiment experiments have now been replicated in over 40 dependent laboratories with consistent results. The statistical meta-analyses show effect sizes that are small but highly significant, with odds against chance occurrence measured in millions or billions to one. Even conservative critics acknowledge that something measurable and repeatable is happening, even if they dispute the interpretation of what that something might be. The Global Consciousness Project at Princeton University has been collecting data from random number generators around the world for over 2 decades. The devices, designed to produce completely unpredictable sequences, show subtle but statistically significant deviations from randomness during major global events, as if collective human consciousness is somehow influencing physical systems during times of widespread emotional significance. September 11, 2001, produced one of the most dramatic effects ever recorded. Random number generators began showing anomalous patterns hours before the attacks occurred, peaked during the events themselves, and gradually returned to normal over the following days. Similar patterns have been observed during natural disasters, major political events, and other occasions when millions of people experience intense emotions simultaneously. Brain imaging technology is revealing the neural signatures of temporal information processing with unprecedented precision. Functional magnetic resonance imaging shows that regions associated with emotional processing and body awareness become active before future emotional stimuli appear. The anterior cingulate cortex, which monitors for conflicts and unexpected events, shows increased activity when consciousness appears to be accessing future information. These neural findings suggest that precognitive processing might be a normal function of brain systems that evolved to detect and respond to threats and opportunities. Instead of being supernatural abilities, gut feelings might represent sophisticated biological early warning systems that operate by accessing temporal information through quantum processes in neural networks. The theoretical framework for understanding these phenomena is rapidly developing. Quantum field theory, consciousness studies, and temporal physics are converging on models that can account for retrocausal information transfer, non-local consciousness effects, and the kinds of anomalous phenomena that have puzzled researchers for decades. Henry Stapp's quantum theory of consciousness provides mathematical formulations for how awareness might access information from different temporal positions through quantum entanglement effects in neural microtubules. His work bridges the gap between abstract physics and subjective experience, showing how quantum mechanics might account for the temporal aspects of consciousness. The many-worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, championed by physicists like Max Tegmark and David Deutsch, offers another theoretical framework for understanding temporal information access. If every quantum event creates parallel universes where all possible outcomes occur, consciousness might have natural access to information from nearby parallel timelines. Even skeptical researchers are beginning to acknowledge that the accumulating evidence requires serious scientific attention. Dr. Darrell Bem's Precognition studies, published in mainstream psychology journals, have forced the scientific community to confront the possibility that future events might influence present behavior through mechanisms that conventional psychology doesn't recognize. The replication debates surrounding Bem's work have actually strengthened the case for precognitive phenomena by demonstrating the kinds of subtle factors that influence when temporal information processing occurs. Studies conducted by believers tend to show stronger effects than studies conducted by skeptics, exactly what you'd expect if consciousness plays an active role in determining which quantum outcomes become actualized. This observer effect in precognition research parallels similar effects throughout quantum physics, where the intentions and expectations of researchers appear to influence experimental outcomes. Instead of indicating methodological problems, these observer effects might provide crucial clues about how consciousness interacts with quantum systems to access temporal information. The practical applications of this research are beginning to emerge. Financial institutions are quietly investigating whether traders with high scores on precognition tests perform better in volatile markets. Medical centers are exploring whether healthcare providers' intuitive impressions can predict patient outcomes more accurately than standard diagnostic procedures. Military and intelligence agencies continue to fund consciousness research, building on the decades of work conducted during the Cold War remote viewing programs. The applications for strategic planning, threat assessment, and tactical decision-making are obvious if temporal information access proves to be a trainable capability. But perhaps the most significant applications will be in personal development and decision-making. As understanding of temporal information processing improves, people might learn to develop and trust their natural precognitive abilities more effectively. The gap between scientific understanding and practical application of gut feelings is rapidly closing. Biofeedback technologies that can detect the physiological signatures of precognitive processing are becoming increasingly sophisticated. Heart rate variability monitors, skin conductance sensors, and EEG devices can now provide real-time feedback about when consciousness appears to be accessing temporal information. These technologies could help people learn to recognize the subtle physical sensations associated with genuine precognitive impressions versus ordinary anxiety, wishful thinking, or random mental noise. Developing this discrimination could dramatically improve the practical value of intuitive decision-making. The integration of consciousness research with artificial intelligence is opening entirely new possibilities. Machine learning algorithms can analyze patterns in precognitive performance that human researchers might miss, identifying the conditions under which temporal information processing is most accurate. AI systems might eventually be able to detect when humans are accessing temporal information and provide guidance about how to interpret and act upon these impressions. The combination of artificial intelligence and enhanced human intuition could create decision-making capabilities that far exceed what either system could achieve alone. Virtual and augmented reality technologies might provide training environments for developing temporal information processing skills. Instead of waiting for spontaneous gut feelings to occur, people might be able to practice recognizing and interpreting precognitive impressions in controlled, gamified environments. The democratization of consciousness research through citizen science projects is accelerating progress in unexpected ways. Smartphone apps that can conduct simple precognition experiments are allowing thousands of people to contribute data, while simultaneously developing their own temporal information processing abilities. Online platforms are connecting people who experience frequent precognitive phenomena, allowing them to share techniques, compare experiences, and participate in large-scale studies that would be impossible to conduct through traditional academic research channels. This grassroots scientific movement is generating insights that complement formal laboratory research. Real-world experiences of precognitive phenomena often involve complex, emotionally significant situations that are difficult to replicate in controlled settings. Citizen science approaches can study these naturally occurring experiences while maintaining scientific rigor. The cultural implications of legitimizing temporal information processing research are profound. If consciousness can access future information through natural biological processes, then indigenous wisdom traditions that have long recognized such capabilities will be vindicated. Scientific materialism will need to expand to accommodate phenomena that transcend conventional space-time boundaries. Educational systems might need to include training in temporal intelligence alongside analytical reasoning and emotional intelligence. Understanding how to recognize, interpret, and act upon gut feelings could become as important as learning mathematics or reading comprehension. The economic implications are equally significant. If some individuals have reliable access to future information, traditional concepts of market efficiency and fair competition will be challenged. New regulatory frameworks might be needed to address the advantages that enhanced precognitive abilities could provide in business and financial contexts. But the most profound implications involve what it means to be human in a universe where consciousness transcends temporal boundaries. If awareness can access information from future events, then free will, moral responsibility, and personal identity all need to be reconsidered. The scientific validation of temporal information processing might mark a turning point in human evolution, not biological evolution, but the evolution of consciousness itself. We might be developing capabilities that allow us to navigate time as skillfully as we navigate space, opening possibilities for human experience that previous generations could barely imagine. Your next gut feeling not be just an intuitive hunch. It might be your first conscious step into a future where the boundaries between past, present, and tomorrow dissolve into something far more fluid and wonderful than our current understanding suggests. 20 years from now, you might wake up each morning and check your temporal weather forecast the same way you currently check tomorrow's temperature and precipitation. Your personal AI assistant might inform you that there's a 73% probability of encountering a significant opportunity around 2:30 p.m., with emotional resonance patterns suggesting it involves creative collaboration. Meanwhile, Your biometric sensors detect elevated cardiac coherence, indicating strong precognitive processing about an upcoming fall that could change the trajectory of your career. This isn't fantasy. It's the logical extrapolation of current trends in consciousness research, neurotechnology, and our growing understanding of how awareness interacts with time. If gut feelings really are memories from the future, then the technologies and social systems of tomorrow will be designed around enhancing, interpreting, and acting upon temporal information that consciousness naturally accesses. The scientific paradigm is already shifting. Within the next decade, temporal information processing will likely transition from fringe research to mainstream investigation as more laboratories replicate precognitive effects and theoretical frameworks mature to explain these phenomena. Major universities will establish departments of consciousness and time studies. Government agencies will openly fund research into practical applications of precognitive abilities. The first generation of commercial precognitive enhancement technologies will probably emerge within 5-10 years. These devices will be sophisticated versions of current biofeedback systems, capable of detecting the subtle physiological signatures that accompany temporal information processing and providing real-time feedback to help users recognize when they're accessing future information. Early adopters might be professionals who make high-stakes decisions under uncertainty: surgeons, pilots, emergency responders, investment managers. The competitive advantages of enhanced temporal awareness could be enormous in fields where split-second decisions determine life or death outcomes or financial success. As the technology matures and costs decrease, temporal enhancement devices could become as common as smartphones. Instead of just connecting you to information from around the world, your personal device might connect you to information from across your personal timeline. Social media platforms might include features for sharing temporal impressions and comparing precognitive insights. Educational systems will need to evolve to include temporal intelligence training alongside traditional academic subjects. Children might learn to recognize and interpret gut feelings as naturally as they learn to read and write. Schools could incorporate meditation practices, biofeedback training, and decision-making curricula designed to enhance natural precognitive abilities. The workplace implications are staggering. Team leaders might consult group temporal intelligence before making strategic decisions, combining analytical planning with collective access to future information. Project management could involve monitoring team members' precognitive impressions about potential obstacles and opportunities. Medical practice could be revolutionized by healthcare providers who are trained to recognize and act upon temporal information about patient outcomes. Emergency rooms might triage patients based partially on medical staff's intuitive impressions about which cases require immediate attention. Surgical teams might incorporate precognitive awareness into their decision-making processes during complex operations. Investment and business planning could integrate temporal information processing with traditional financial analysis. Portfolio managers might balance quantitative models with systematic approaches to accessing temporal information about market movements. Entrepreneurs might use enhanced gut feelings to guide product development, market timing, and strategic partnerships. The legal and ethical frameworks for temporal information use will require careful development. Should employers be allowed to require precognitive testing as a job qualification? How would legal systems handle decisions made based on information from future events? What privacy rights apply to temporal information about other people's futures? Insurance companies might need to consider temporal information access when assessing risk. If some individuals can reliably sense future events that could affect their health, finances, or safety, traditional actuarial models would be disrupted. New categories of coverage might emerge for temporal information-related risks and benefits. International relations could be transformed by governments that develop sophisticated temporal intelligence capabilities. Diplomatic negotiations might involve accessing information about the long-term consequences of different agreements. Military planning could integrate precognitive intelligence with traditional surveillance and analysis, but the technology will also raise profound questions about human agency and the nature of free will. If people can access reliable information about future outcomes, will they become psychologically dependent on temporal guidance? Could enhanced precognitive abilities actually reduce human autonomy by making people feel bound to follow the futures they glimpse? the social stratification implications are concerning. If temporal enhancement technologies are expensive or restricted, they could create unprecedented inequalities between those with and without access to future information. Economic and social advantages compound over time, and temporal information advantages could create divergent developmental pathways for different populations. Regulatory frameworks will need to address the responsible development and deployment of temporal enhancement technologies. International agreements might be necessary to prevent temporal information arms races between nations or corporations. Standards will be needed for the accuracy, safety, and ethical use of precognitive enhancement systems. The psychological and cultural adaptations required for integrating temporal awareness into daily life could be substantial. Human psychology evolved for creatures living primarily in the present moment with limited future prediction capabilities. Consciousness that regularly accesses future information might require new forms of mental health support and social organization. Relationships could be transformed when partners can sense information about their shared futures. Marriage and romantic partnerships might involve explicit discussions about temporal compatibility and shared approaches to interpreting future information. Child rearing include helping children learn to navigate temporal awareness responsibly. Religious and spiritual traditions will need to integrate scientific understanding of temporal consciousness with their existing theological frameworks. If consciousness can access future information through natural processes, how does this relate to concepts of divine providence, fate, and spiritual guidance? Some traditions might see scientific validation of temporal awareness as confirming their mystical teachings, while others might struggle to adapt their doctrines. The artistic and creative implications are extraordinary. Musicians, writers, visual artists, and other creators might learn to access temporal information about the reception and impact of their work. And creative collaboration could involve sharing precognitive impressions about artistic directions and audience responses. Entertainment could evolve to include temporal interaction elements where audiences' collective precognitive impressions influence narrative developments in real time. Gaming could incorporate actual temporal information processing challenges rather than simulated future prediction scenarios. Scientific research methodology will need to evolve to accommodate the role of consciousness in determining experimental outcomes. The observer effect in quantum mechanics might extend to all forms of empirical investigation, requiring new approaches to objectivity and experimental control that acknowledge the participatory role of awareness in creating the phenomena being studied. Environmental and climate planning could benefit enormously from collective temporal intelligence about long-term ecological changes. If large populations can develop sensitivity to future environmental conditions, this information could guide conservation efforts, adaptation planning, and sustainable development policies. Disaster preparedness might incorporate systematic monitoring of collective precognitive impressions about potential natural disasters, terrorist attacks, or other catastrophic events. Early warning systems based on temporal information could provide crucial additional time for evacuation and emergency response. The ultimate question is whether developing these capabilities will enhance human flourishing or create new categories of problems that we're not prepared to handle. The power to access future information comes with enormous responsibility for using that information wisely and ethically. Perhaps most importantly, the future of gut feelings depends on how we choose to develop and apply our growing understanding of temporal consciousness. We could create technologies and social systems that enhance human wisdom and decision-making capabilities, or we could create tools that are used for manipulation, exploitation, and control. The choices we make today about consciousness research, temporal enhancement technologies, and the ethical frameworks for their use will determine whether future generations experience enhanced precognitive abilities as liberation or burden, as expansion of human potential or new forms of technological dependence. But one thing seems certain: the scientific validation of temporal information processing will fundamentally alter what it means to be human. Your children might grow up in a world where consulting your future self is as natural as consulting your past memories, where temporal intelligence is as valued as analytical reasoning, where the boundaries between past, present, and future are far more fluid than anything our current culture imagines. The next time you have a gut feeling about something, you might be experiencing a preview of humanity's temporal future, a future where consciousness and time dance together in ways that expand the very definition of what it means to be aware, to choose, and to exist in the magnificent mystery we call reality. Here we stand, at the end of our journey through the landscapes of consciousness and time, and yet perhaps we're really at the beginning of something far more profound. We've explored the scientific evidence that suggests gut feelings might actually be memories from the future. We've examined the quantum mechanics that could make temporal information access possible. We've investigated the biological systems that might process precognitive data. We've considered the technologies that could enhance these natural capabilities. But the deepest question remains, what does all of this mean for you, right now, as you live your life in what seems like the eternal present moment? If consciousness can truly access information from future events, then everything changes. You are not trapped in this moment, limited to making decisions based only on past experience and current circumstances. You are a temporal being with natural access to information that spans across your entire life timeline. Every gut feeling, every intuitive hunch, every inexplicable sense of knowing might be evidence of your consciousness operating according to principles that transcend ordinary space and time. The implications ripple through every aspect of human experience. When you sense that you should take a different route to work, when you feel drawn to call someone you haven't spoken to in months, when you have a strong impression about how a meeting will unfold, these experiences might not be mysterious coincidences or wishful projections. They might be your consciousness accessing actual information from your personal future timeline. But even if the scientific case for precognitive gut feelings is still developing, even if the quantum theories remain speculative, even if the biological mechanisms are not yet fully understood, there's practical wisdom in paying attention to the subtle information that emerges from the depths of your awareness. The research on intuitive decision-making shows consistently that people who learn to recognize and trust their gut feelings often make better choices than those who rely exclusively on analytical reasoning. Whether this occurs through sophisticated unconscious pattern recognition or through actual access to future information might be less important than learning to work skillfully with the wisdom that emerges when you quiet analytical thinking and listen to subtler forms of knowing. Your autonomic nervous system, your heart rhythm patterns, your skin conductance, your neural networks, all of these biological systems appear to be constantly processing information that exceeds what your conscious mind can access through ordinary sensory channels. Learning to recognize and interpret the signals from these deeper information processing systems might be one of the most practical skills you can develop. The techniques for enhancing temporal intelligence are accessible right now, regardless of future technological developments. Meditation practices that enhance present moment awareness while opening to subtle impressions from other temporal positions. Biofeedback training that helps you recognize the physiological signatures of intuitive processing. Contemplative practices that develop sensitivity to the emotional and somatic dimensions of decision-making. But perhaps the most important insight from our exploration is that consciousness itself remains one of the deepest mysteries in existence. Whether or not gut feelings are literally memories from the future, the fact that you can have subjective experiences, that there's something it's like to be you, that awareness exists at all in a universe of quantum fields and space-time geometry, these remain profound mysteries that science is only beginning to investigate. Your consciousness is the most intimate and immediate aspect of your existence, yet also the most mysterious. You can directly experience awareness, but you can't explain how subjective experience arises from objective physical processes. You can observe your own thoughts and feelings, but you can't locate the observer who's doing the observing. If consciousness can transcend temporal boundaries, this might point to something even more fundamental about the nature of awareness itself. Perhaps consciousness isn't produced by brains, but is instead a basic feature of reality that brains detect and focus, like radio receivers tuning into signals that exist independently of the receiving apparatus. This perspective, known as panpsychism, suggests that consciousness might be woven into the fabric of the universe itself, present at every scale from quantum particles to galaxies. If this is true, then your awareness isn't confined to your individual brain, but is part of a larger consciousness field that extends throughout space and time. Your gut feelings might be moments when your local consciousness connects more clearly with this larger field, accessing information that transcends the boundaries of your individual neural network. The wisdom that emerges during contemplative states might reflect your participation in a cosmic intelligence that operates according to principles we're only beginning to understand. But whether consciousness is fundamental or emergent, temporal or eternal, individual or collective, the practical reality remains that you wake up each morning with the capacity for subjective experience and the responsibility for making choices that shape your life and influence others. The scientific exploration of gut feelings and temporal consciousness doesn't diminish the mystery of existence, it deepens it. Understanding the possible biological and quantum mechanical basis for precognitive abilities reveals consciousness to be even more extraordinary than previous generations imagined. We might be living in a universe where awareness and reality co-evolve through feedback loops that transcend ordinary causation, where consciousness doesn't just observe reality, but participates in creating it through quantum measurement processes that collapse possibility into actuality, where your choices are informed by actual knowledge of their consequences through temporal information channels that evolution has been developing for millions of years. The research suggests that every human being might possess latent temporal information processing capabilities that could be developed through appropriate training and attention. Your next gut feeling might be your first conscious step into exploring abilities that could transform how you navigate uncertainty, make decisions, and understand your place in the larger patterns of existence. The threshold between present and future might be far more permeable than our ordinary experience suggests. Linear time, the steady progression from past through present to future, might be a construction of limited awareness rather than a fundamental feature of reality. From a larger perspective, your entire life timeline might exist simultaneously, with consciousness moving through it like a spotlight illuminating different moments in sequence. If this is true, then death itself not be the end of experience, but simply a transition to a different mode of temporal awareness. The information patterns that constitute your consciousness might continue to exist, even after the biological processes that currently sustain them cease to function. Near-death experiences, with their reports of life reviews and encounters with deceased relatives, might provide glimpses of consciousness operating beyond biological constraints. But even without certainty about what lies beyond biological death, understanding consciousness as temporally extended can transform how you approach living. Every choice becomes an opportunity to explore the deepest capacities of awareness. Every moment of attention becomes a chance to participate consciously in the ongoing creation of reality. The mundane and the miraculous interpenetrate when consciousness is understood as a temporal phenomenon. Grocery shopping becomes an exercise in temporal intelligence when you pay attention to subtle impressions about which foods your future self will appreciate. Career planning becomes consultation with timeline positions where different professional paths have been explored. Relationship decisions become opportunities to access information about how different partnership choices might unfold across multiple future scenarios. This doesn't mean abandoning analytical reasoning or becoming dependent on intuitive impressions alone. The most skilled decision makers appear to integrate multiple forms of intelligence: analytical thinking, emotional wisdom, social awareness, and temporal intelligence into coherent approaches to navigating complexity. The future of human consciousness might involve learning to orchestrate these different intelligence systems more skillfully, creating forms of integrated awareness that exceed what any single approach could achieve. We might be on the verge of evolutionary developments in consciousness itself, expanding human capabilities in directions that previous generations could barely imagine. Your gut feelings might be early indicators of these expanding capabilities. Every time you trust an intuitive impression that leads to beneficial outcomes, every time you sense something about a future situation that proves accurate, every time you follow your instincts over pure logic and discover wisdom you couldn't have accessed analytically, you might be participating in the next phase of human consciousness development. The scientific validation of temporal information processing could mark a turning point in human civilization comparable to the development of language, agriculture, or scientific method. Understanding consciousness as temporally extended might provide the conceptual framework for integrating scientific materialism with wisdom traditions, individual development with collective evolution, technological capability with spiritual insight. But the most profound implication might be the simplest. You are far more extraordinary than you realize. Your consciousness doesn't just witness the unfolding of time. It participates actively in creating the reality it experiences. Your awareness doesn't just observe events. It influences which possibilities become actualized through quantum processes that bridge mind and matter, subject and object, present and future. Every moment of conscious attention, every choice guided by wisdom rather than fear, every act of love that transcends narrow self-interest, all of these expressions of consciousness might be contributing to the ongoing evolution of reality itself. You are not just living in the universe. You are helping to create the universe through the quality of awareness you bring to each moment. Your next gut feeling might be more than just a hunch about tomorrow's weather or next week's meeting. It might be consciousness itself reaching across the boundaries of time to guide you toward futures that serve not just your individual well-being, but the well-being of the larger patterns of life and awareness of which you are an integral part. The threshold between present and future dissolves when consciousness is recognized as the bridge between what was, what is, and what could be. Step across that threshold. Trust the wisdom that emerges from the depths of awareness. Listen to the messages from tomorrow that might be whispering in today's stillness. Your consciousness time machine awaits. The journey through temporal possibility spaces begins with your willingness to take seriously the miraculous fact that you are aware at all. In a universe that has evolved beings capable of experiencing themselves, reflecting on their experience, and participating consciously in the ongoing creation of reality. The future remembers you. The question is, will you remember to listen?